Chapter 45-43. The fifth palace master was truly extremely lucky to have picked up a treasure. If it were an hour ago, he would never have believed that a random desolate race godly king he picked up on the side of the road would be able to obtain 2 pieces of confidential information. The matter of the Li city was related to the ambitions and plans of the beast race. It was extremely important to the Kongming temple. And Ji Tianxing's whereabouts were related to the efforts and future of the Kongming temple for tens of thousands of years. It was of utmost importance. Now, these 2 pieces of information had been easily grasped by the fifth palace master. Who could be luckier than him? Just a moment ago, the fifth palace master was still thinking of how to punish Ding Lang, but now he found him extremely pleasing to the eye, treating him as his lucky star. Ah! The heavens are really helping me. The fifth palace master laughed heartily. His excitement was evident in his words. He did not waste any time and hurriedly took out a transmission jade scroll. After deliberating over the wording, he reported the matter of the Li city and the news of Ji Tianxing to the first palace master. Ding Lang was trying to curry favor with him, hoping to gain his trust and favor. And as the youngest of the 5 palace masters and the weakest in terms of strength, his status was also the last. Therefore he had his own selfish motives. He wanted to raise his prestige and status so as to obtain more power and benefits. Today Ding Lang had brought him 2 pieces of information. They were about the great contributions he had made, increasing his bargaining chips. Phew! The special transmission jade transformed into a stream of light and left the divine cruiser. After sending the message, the fifth palace master was in a good mood. He sat on his throne and stared at Ding Lang, saying, "Ding Lang, you are very lucky to have met this emperor after escaping death. Don't worry, this emperor guarantees that you will be safely brought out of the unknown land. Furthermore, once it is verified that your information is true, this emperor will reward you handsomely." This was the fifth palace master's promise. It did sound very exciting. But amidst Ding Lang's excitement, he secretly thought that the fifth palace master was too stingy. However, he could only keep this thought in his mind and could not say it out loud. He hurriedly put on a grateful and flattered look and bowed to the fifth palace master, saying, "This subordinate guarantees that what I have said is true and every word is true. Palace master, please verify it. Furthermore, this subordinate is extremely grateful to Lord Hall Master for saving my life. How would I dare to claim credit and ask for a reward? I just want to stay under Lord Temple Master's command and help you solve your problems. I won't hesitate even if I have to sacrifice my life." Ding Lang's words attracted the attention of over 20 guards, who cast vigilant and defensive gazes at him. No one was an idiot. The meaning he expressed was very clear. He would rather not have any reward as long as he could work under the fifth hall master. This was much more practical than any resources or treasures. If he could get what he wanted, he would have a meteoric rise. However, these guards could only be jealous in their hearts. It was understandable. It couldn't be helped. After all, Ding Lang had just made 2 irreplaceable contributions. The fifth palace master also understood Ding Lang's thoughts. He thought that keeping this talent would definitely be useful. He only needed to make a promise to win over the hearts of the people and would not lose anything. Thus he nodded and agreed to Ding Lang's request. The result was naturally to everyone's delight. Time passed quietly and soon another 5 days had passed. Ji Tianxing had already been preaching on the plaza outside the Divine Palace for 20 consecutive days. In this period of time, close to 20,000 beasts that could take human form had come to listen to his preaching. Every beast had more or less gained something after listening. Their strength and cultivation levels had increased. Among them, 30% of the beasts had a very obvious increase in strength, breaking through 1 or 2 cultivation levels in 20 days. The remaining 70% of the beasts had not broken through for the time being, but it was still a matter of time. In short, the battle prowess of these 20,000 beast race god kings had greatly increased. In addition, many beasts had learned the art of refining pills, forging artifacts and setting up formations. They began to research and experiment. Li City, which had a radius of 10,000 miles, became increasingly lively. Many beasts chose the direction of their main cultivation based on their own innate abilities. Some chose to be apothecaries, some focused on forging artifacts, and some studied formations. Every day, some craftsmen could be seen casting spells in the mountains and rivers, attempting to build houses and palaces. There were also some beast race god kings who wandered around the herb mountains and forging workshops, attempting to refine pills and forge artifacts. There were even some who ran to the barren mountains and forests around Li City, attempting to draw upon the divine power of heaven and earth to set up formations. And the most lively place in Li City was still Ji Tianxing's divine palace. The plaza outside the divine palace had completely become the beast race's publicly acknowledged training ground. Every day, the beasts that gathered here were either listening to the preaching of the Tao or debating with one another. Such a flourishing change made the entire Li City seem to be full of vitality. All the beasts were filled with confidence for the future. And Ji Tianxing's position in the hearts of the beasts was once again cemented. He had become the unshakable third titan. In fact, many beasts had already begun to respectfully refer to him as the imperial tutor when discussing him in private. Imperial tutor was the literal meaning of the title. He was the teacher of the God Emperor realm. These beasts that had just been educated were always more straightforward and straightforward. They were clear about their likes and dislikes. At the same time, Skysplit and Loathing, who had disappeared for nearly a month, reappeared in the sights of all the beasts. These two old ancestors of the God Emperor realm had been in seclusion for an entire month. When they had just started their seclusion, they were still very excited and full of anticipation. They thought that they would soon be able to learn one or two divine arts. After all, Ji Tianxing had told them that the 10 divine arts he had given them were all very basic. Therefore, Skysplit chose an array formation divine art to study, while Loathing chose an artifact refining divine art to study. Who would have thought that after a month of seclusion, they would only focus on studying one divine art, but they still only understood half of it. In order not to waste time, Skysplit and Loathing could only endure the awkwardness and end their seclusion to seek guidance from Ji Tianxing. After the two sides met, before Skysplit and Loathing could speak, Ji Tianxing revealed a smile. I thought that you would come find this emperor after half a month of seclusion. I didn't expect you to wait 20 days before coming. Obviously, he had long expected that with Skysplit and Loathing's comprehension and aptitude, it would be very difficult for them to cultivate a certain divine art on their own. Skysplit smiled embarrassedly. In order to ease the awkwardness, it changed the topic and talked about the scene of its clansmen happily discussing the Tao. The tens of thousands of beasts in Li City had such a change, and it was all thanks to Ji Tianxing's teachings. Skysplit and Loathing would remember it in their hearts and be eternally grateful. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, "Your time is tight and this emperor is also very busy. There's no need to say any more words of thanks. Use practical actions to prove it." Skysplit immediately understood what he meant and hurriedly patted his chest and promised, "Long Tian, don't worry. We will not go back on what we promised you. It's just that emperor-grade materials are too rare and hard to find. Currently, only the subordinates of one of the lords have found them. They are on the way to Li City." Chapter 45-44. It wasn't that Ji Tianxing didn't trust Lai Skysplit and Yen Li. He just wanted to remind them so that they wouldn't only focus on cultivating in seclusion and forget the conditions they agreed upon. Since Lai Skysplit patted its chest and guaranteed that it was fine, Ji Tianxing didn't say anything more. Then he asked about Lai Skysplit and Yen Li's cultivation progress so that he could help them answer their doubts. Lai Skysplit was more modest and let Yen Li talk about its situation first. Yen Li didn't decline and directly told Ji Tianxing about some of its confusion and puzzlement when studying the refining divine ability. After Ji Tianxing listened, he understood what level it had reached and how to guide and enlighten it. Not only did he answer Yen Li's questions, but he also gave it a lot of pointers and imparted the corresponding experience to it. After listening, Yen Li was enlightened and finally understood the whole story. It couldn't wait to leave and continue cultivating in seclusion. As long as there weren't any accidents, Yen Li would definitely be able to cultivate that divine ability secret method within half a month at most. After Yen Li left, Lai Skysplit told Ji Tianxing about its confusion and puzzlement. The array path divine ability it comprehended was also the most important of the 3 skills. Only those who were proficient in array path could better refine pills and refine tools. Therefore, Lai Skysplit attached great importance to this. Ji Tianxing first explained its doubts and helped it solve the confusion in its heart. Then he should have imparted his experience to Lai Skysplit and talked about the essentials of cultivating this divine ability. But he didn't do that and said naturally, "Even if I tell you about the experience and insights of cultivating this divine ability, it may not be of much use. Every god has their own path and you need to comprehend it yourself in the end. Moreover, it's useless for us to talk about it here. Why don't I give you a practical demonstration and you will naturally understand? Lai Skysplit was shocked and seemed to be in disbelief. Long Tian, you want to set up the array yourself and demonstrate it for me? That's great. Thank you so much. Lai Skysplit was already very grateful that Ji Tianqing was willing to teach him the emperor-level divine ability. Lai Skysplit didn't expect that he would be willing to personally demonstrate and give guidance on the spot. This kind of treatment was usually only available when a master was teaching his disciple. However, the two of them were not master and disciple. They were merely god-emperor experts of equal status. They did not have a deep relationship, only an agreement. This made Lai Tian admire Ji Tianqing's character even more, and he respected him even more. Skylai didn't hesitate. After thanking Ji Tianqing, he followed him out of the divine palace and flew high into the sky. Next, Ji Tianqing stood in the sky above Li Du. He explained to Lai Tian as he executed his divine ability and began to set up the formation. He performed a secret technique to gather the divine power of heaven and earth within a radius of 1,000,000 miles and gathered it near Li City. Thousands of spells and seals gathered endless divine power, covering the entire Li City and beginning to form the array foundation. Ji Tianqing deliberately slowed down the process of casting the spell and forming the divine formation so that Skysplitting could see it more clearly. Skysplitter watched intently and was especially engrossed. He had indeed quickly learned this divine ability. This was the first time Ji Tianqing had cast a divine formation in front of everyone after entering Li City. Moreover, it was a formation that covered the entire Li City. Therefore, not long after he and Lai Tian appeared in the sky, they attracted the attention of many beast race god kings. Especially those beast race god kings in the plaza outside the divine palace. They had been meditating all night long, discussing and verifying Dao techniques with each other. Suddenly, they saw Ji Tianqing setting up the formation while Lai Tian was learning from the side. How could they miss this excellent opportunity? Therefore, hundreds of beast race god kings looked up at the sky and watched Ji Tianqing cast the spell without blinking. Although Ji Tianqing was using an emperor-level divine ability, those beast race god kings might not be able to understand or learn it. However, their purpose of observing experts casting spells was to learn from experience and techniques, and to gain new insights and insights. Not long after, Ji Tianqing cast the 1,000 divine seals and gathered millions of divine lights to form a dazzling net in the sky above Li City. The tens of millions of beams of god power were like thousands of threads that weaved into a huge net that fell onto the ground. Such a dazzling scene naturally attracted the attention of tens of thousands of beasts. Almost all of the beasts in Li City were alarmed. Many beasts looked up at the sky. Looking at the gorgeous scene, they revealed expressions of awe and reverence. After just 6 hours, Ji Tianqing finished setting up an emperor-level formation. This formation covered a radius of 10,000 miles, including the entire Li City. It could defend against external enemies and protect Li City. It also had the effect of invisibility, confusion, trapping, and so on. In comparison, the city protection formation that Lai Tian and Yan Li had set up for Li City was not even worth mentioning. It was like child's play. After this emperor-level defensive formation was activated, a golden ball of light with a radius of 10,000 miles enveloped the entire Li City. The semicircular golden barrier was more than 2 feet thick. It was solid and its defensive power was extremely strong. Furthermore, the formation would automatically operate, constantly absorbing the divine powers of heaven and earth. Even if no one maintained or controlled it, the defensive formation could last for tens of thousands of years. When the formation was activated, it could shine with a golden light that was divine and brilliant, but it could also be invisible. Ji Tianqing displayed it in front of everyone. With a wave of his hand, he produced a divine seal, and the golden ball of light with a radius of 10,000 miles disappeared. However, the beastmen standing at the edge of the formation could touch an invisible wall that separated the inside and outside of Li City. Such a scene was not uncommon in the territories of the Desolate race or the Celestial race. However, in Li City many of the beasts were seeing it for the first time. They found it novel and magical and all of them were shouting excitedly. The tens of thousands of beasts were also excited and spirited. They cheered loudly to express their gratitude to Ji Tianqing. After all, Ji Tianqing had personally set up a defensive formation for Li City. From now on, the beastmen living in the Li capital would feel more secure and at ease. In fact, Ji Tianxing did not tell everyone that the formation he had set up had the ability to gather the divine powers of heaven and earth and change the feng shui landscape. Although Li City was the place with the most divine powers in a radius of 10 million miles, it was too primitive, and the divine powers of heaven and earth were not condensed enough. With this defensive formation, the divine powers of heaven and earth could be condensed without dissipating. Over time, Li City would become a rare spirit vein, a sacred cultivation ground. On the ground, tens of thousands of beasts were still cheering and celebrating. In the sky, Lai Tian had learned the entire casting process. He was already familiar with it and immediately wanted to return to try cultivating it. However, Ji Tianxing asked him to stay. Lai Tian, I believe you have already learned the array formation divine power. There's no need to rush to try it out immediately. Using today's opportunity, I will demonstrate and explain the second array formation divine power to you. Ah? You want to set up a second formation? Lai Tian could not believe his ears. He was pleasantly surprised. Chapter 45-45. Ji Tianxing demonstrated it to Lai Tian in front of him and explained it in detail, allowing it to learn an emperor-level divine ability within 6 hours. If Lai Tian were to cultivate in seclusion alone, it would definitely not succeed without a year and a half. Lai Tian was already very satisfied to be able to learn the first divine ability quickly. It did not expect that Ji Tianxing would perform another array Dao divine ability and demonstrate and explain it to it. Lai Tian was pleasantly surprised and excited, but at the same time it could not help but mutter in its heart. Long Tian's behavior seems a little abnormal. Usually he is not so proactive. Why did he take the initiative to demonstrate and explain to me today and even help me set up a large array? Is there something wrong with it? Although the beast race was naturally upright, it did not mean that they were heartless. No matter how grateful Lai Tian was to Ji Tianxing, it was impossible for it to completely trust him. After discovering that Ji Tianxing was a little abnormal, it was normal for Lai Tian to have some suspicions. However, no matter how Lai Tian thought about it, it could not think of any scheme Ji Tianxing could have, let alone any conspiracy. If it was said that Ji Tianxing had deliberately set up 2 great formations to seal Li Du, Lai Tian was not a fool. It had been watching from the side. As long as Ji Tianxing had such a sign, it would immediately stop it. After dispelling the doubts in its heart, Lai Tian could only conclude that perhaps it was gauging the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Perhaps Ji Tianxing did not have any ulterior motives or malice at all. He just wanted to use this opportunity to help it quickly master the 2 divine abilities and secret techniques. As for the defensive array that Ji Tianxing set up for Li City, it was the best choice before Lai Tian had the confidence and certainty to surpass it. Only when it was able to improve or rearrange the formation would it be able to take action. Then Lai Tian expelled all distracting thoughts and focused on watching Ji Tianxing perform the technique. The second divine ability that Ji Tianxing performed was still the arrangement of an emperor-level array. This formation was almost identical to the first defensive formation. It also had to cover a radius of 5,000 kilometers. Even the method of setting up the formation was somewhat similar. However, this formation was clearly an advanced version. It was more intricate than the first formation and its power had also increased. Sky Splitter watched carefully and suddenly felt a little grateful and ashamed. It suddenly understood why Ji Tianxing taught it 2 divine abilities at once. It was because the methods of setting up these 2 great formations were 80% similar. In this way, by teaching it the 2 formations together, it would be able to grasp them faster and integrate them. Ji Tianxing's painstaking efforts to save time for its cultivation really moved it. Furthermore, it still had to suspect Ji Tianxing's purpose and whether or not there was a conspiracy. This made it feel very ashamed. The tens of thousands of beastmen in Li City looked up at Ji Tianxing's appearance as he cast a spell and set up a formation. They watched with increasing seriousness and infatuation. They did not have the same thoughts as Lai Tian. They only knew that God Emperor Long Tian had set up 2 divine formations consecutively as part of today's lesson. It was too sincere. This was much more interesting and enjoyable than the previous lesson at the dojo. Furthermore, the second formation was clearly stronger than the first. This filled many beastmen with anticipation. They also wanted to see what new changes would happen to Li City after Ji Tianxing set up the second formation. Rewind time to 5 days ago. After the 5th Palatial Lord sent a message to the Grand Palatial Lord. The Grand Palatial Lord learned that there was a Li city hidden in the core region of the unknown lands. The ignorant beastmen were actually learning the desolate race's alchemy, weapon refinement and array formation techniques in a vain attempt to strengthen themselves. After reading this news, the Grand Palatial Lord's first reaction was that the beastmen had wild ambitions and had to be suppressed as soon as possible. He could not sit back and watch the beastmen develop and strengthen themselves. He had to extinguish any thoughts of resistance before they became stronger. The Grand Palatial Lord was very pleased that the fifth Palatial Lord had reported this news in a timely manner. Following that, he read the second piece of news. When he learned that the desolate race's young god emperor that they had been painstakingly searching for was hiding in Li City and was even colluding with the beastmen to teach them his techniques, he immediately stood up in excitement. He was pleasantly surprised and also furious. He was pleasantly surprised and excited because he had finally found the young god emperor. As the saying goes, one can wear out iron shoes in a fruitless search, only to find it by chance. He was furious because the young god emperor had colluded with the beastmen. He was indeed sinister and cunning, despicable and shameless. The Grand Palatial Lord did not hesitate to take out a jade scroll and send a message to the four Palatial Lords. There was only one content, and that was to quickly rush to Li City and secretly surround Li City to confirm the location of the desolate race's god emperor. As long as the four Palatial Lords could confirm that the young god emperor was indeed in Li City, they would not act rashly. The four Palatial Lords and their guards only needed to surround Li City and keep a close eye on the young god emperor. The Grand Palatial Lord would rush to Li City as quickly as possible to meet up with everyone. At that time he would personally deploy the plan and command the battle according to the actual situation. After the four Palatial Lords received the order, their reactions were all different. The fifth Palatial Lord was naturally filled with joy. The Grand Palatial Lord's reaction was within his expectations. Although the Grand Palatial Lord had no intention of rewarding him based on his contribution, he was definitely the most meritorious. The other three Palatial Lords, however, were dumbfounded. It took them a long time to come back to their senses. They completely did not expect that a seemingly hopeless matter would actually take a turn for the better. And the most important thing was that the person who had made such a great contribution was actually the most unremarkable fifth Palatial Lord. Their first reaction was that the fifth Palatial Lord was usually so low-key. Who would have thought that he had hidden himself so deeply? But after they knew the whole story, they were so angry that they beat their chests and stomped their feet. They cursed the heavens for being unfair and letting the fifth Palatial Lord run into such great luck. However, no matter how angry they were, it was useless. The Grand Palatial Lord had already given the order, so they could only follow it. In a short 5 days, the four Palatial Lords had all found Li City and were all in position. Each Palatial Lord brought 1,000 elites under their command and laid in ambush in all directions of Li City. They could not act rashly and alert the enemy. They also had to investigate the situation of Li City and confirm whether that young god emperor was in Li City. This matter was very difficult to handle, but it was not a problem for the four Palatial Lords. Their Palatial Lord stopped 300,000 miles away. It was guaranteed that they would not be detected by the powerhouses in Li City. The four Palatial Lords personally took action. They concealed their whereabouts and aura and quietly approached Li City. They used all kinds of divine abilities and secret techniques to investigate the situation of Li City. They investigated bitterly for a few hours and finally figured out the situation of Li City with great difficulty. In the end, there was a huge difference with the information that the fifth Palatial Lord told them. The fifth Palatial Lord told the Palatial Lords that there were only 40,000 beasts in Li City all year round. Among them, only 20% were in the Divine King realm. But the Palatial Lords found out that there were as many as 20,000 Divine King realm beasts gathered in Li City. Chapter 45-46. If there were only 8,000 Divine King realm beasts in Li City, the four Hall Masters wouldn't be worried at all. The 4,000 guards they led were all elites. If they had the upper hand, defeating the beasts in Li City would be a piece of cake. After all, the fifth Hall Master said that the so-called Li City was very simple and crude. It wasn't a city at all. It was nothing more than a barren mountain range. There were only a few crude God King level spirit formations set up in the surroundings. As long as the four Hall Masters attacked, they could completely ignore those defensive arrays and directly attack the core area of Li City. However, the Hall Masters came to Li City full of confidence. but the scene in front of them was completely different from what the fifth Hall Master said. Not to mention that the number of divine kings in Li City didn't match. Even the defensive arrays around Li City weren't as crude as the fifth Hall Master said. Just as the Hall Masters were secretly investigating the situation in Li City, a golden light barrier with a radius of 10,000 miles slowly rose and enveloped the entire Li City. The golden light barrier that covered the sky released a divine pressure that suppressed everything and also contained a powerful Dao aura. That was clearly an exquisite Emperor Realm Divine Array. Moreover, after the Emperor Realm Divine Array was activated, not only did it firmly protect the beasts in Li City, it also isolated all divine senses from probing. Even if the four Hall Masters used their divine abilities and secret techniques, they couldn't pass through the array and investigate the situation in Li City. They also didn't dare to forcefully break the array, otherwise, it would alarm the beasts in Li City. The Hall Masters were helpless and sent messages to the fifth Hall Master. Old Five, what are you doing? Didn't you say that Li City was completely undefended? Old Five, we trusted you so much. Aren't you lying? Fortunately, we were cautious and didn't act rashly. Otherwise, our tracks would have been exposed. The fifth Hall Master was also dumbfounded. He felt like he was deceived. With a gloomy face, he immediately sent a message to Ding Lang and angrily rebuked. Ding Lang, didn't you say that Li City's defenses were in name only and there were only 40,000 beasts inside? Now, not only are there 20,000 Divine King Realm beasts in Li City, there's also an Emperor Realm defensive array. You must give this Emperor a perfect explanation today. Ding Lang was also dumbfounded. He stayed in the battleship and was still 300,000 miles away from the fifth Hall Master, but he still couldn't see the situation in Li Capital. Since the fifth Hall Master was angry, the situation in Li City must have changed. Ding Lang was also a little flustered, but he quickly calmed down. After careful analysis, he sent a message to the fifth Palace Master. Lord Temple Master, when this subordinate left Li City, it was indeed as this subordinate said, there was absolutely no falsehood. However, didn't this also prove that the great God Emperor was indeed in Li City? It was precisely because the God Emperor of the Flood race was teaching the Dao in Li City that even more God Kings of the Beast race were attracted to Li City to listen and learn the Dao. It was also with the help of the God Emperor that the Beast race was able to quickly construct an Emperor-level divine formation to protect Li City. Otherwise, how could the two old ancestors of the Beast clan set up a God Emperor-level great array? Thinking of this reason and explanation, Ding Lang was quite pleased with himself and couldn't help but praise himself. After the fifth Hall Master received his message, he secretly pondered for a moment and felt enlightened, so he told the other three Hall Masters. The three Hall Masters were discussing whether to tell the truth to the Lord Temple Master and let him reprimand the fifth Hall Master. Since the fifth Hall Master gave a reasonable explanation, the other three Hall Masters couldn't continue to argue and could only accept this reason. Next, the four Hall Masters stood guard outside Li City's defensive formation, keeping a close eye on the four directions and monitoring Li City's movements. Before the Lord Temple Master arrived, they couldn't act blindly without thinking, nor could they act on their own accord. When Ji Tianxing set up the first divine formation, it only took 6 hours. But when he set up the second one, it took him a full 16 hours. Sky Splitter watched attentively from the side. He could even cast a spell and occasionally help Ji Tianxing. This gave him a sense of accomplishment, proving that he had also grasped some of the tricks of the Emperor-level formation. Lai Tian was immersed in the joy of comprehending array formations and learning new array formations, forgetting the passage of time. The tens of thousands of beasts in Li City also watched Ji Tianxing cast spells, accompanying him from dawn to night and then to the next morning. Finally, the second divine formation was completed. Another multicolored barrier of divine light with a radius of 10,000 miles enveloped the entire Li City. This barrier of divine light quickly merged with the first divine formation, and the two complemented each other, increasing their power by about 40%. When the God Kings of the Beast race discovered this, they instantly let out cries of surprise, revealing sincere expressions of amazement. Only then did they understand that the second divine formation Ji Tianxing cast was not only stronger than the first one, but it could also be stacked. After the two divine formations complemented each other, their power could be greatly increased. This was one of the essences of the use of array formations. Without a doubt, Ji Tianxing used practical actions to teach the tens of thousands of beasts in Li City an incomparably fascinating lesson. And this lesson had greatly benefited all of the beasts. They had been enlightened. Even Sky Lai admired him from the bottom of his heart. Many insights appeared in his mind, and he had a deeper understanding of the formation Dao divine ability that he was about to cultivate. Long Tian, thank you for demonstrating and explaining for me, and thank you for everything you've done for Li City. Lai Tian was extremely grateful to Ji Tianxing. You've cast 2 emperor-level divine formations in a row, and your divine power has been greatly depleted. You must be exhausted. How about this? Quickly return to the divine palace to rest for a few days. In the next few days, you don't have to impart your teachings, let everyone study on their own. Lai Tian sincerely persuaded Ji Tianxing to rest. He also wanted to immediately go into seclusion and master these 2 array formations as soon as possible. Ji Tianxing waved his hand indicating that there was no need to rush. Lai Tian, do you know why I cast 2 emperor-level divine formations in a row? Lai Tian answered without hesitation, naturally it's to let the 2 great formations merge and increase their power. No. Ji Tianxing shook his head and said seriously, I'm not talking about that, but why did I suddenly cast the formations? Of course, this was also the question that Lai Tian was most concerned about. He looked at Ji Tianxing seriously and asked, why? Ji Tianxing looked calmly at the western sky and explained, because I sensed danger. I had a premonition that a strong enemy was coming and was about to bring a bloody disaster to Li City. Lai Tian was startled for a moment, and after thinking for a moment he guessed what he meant and blurted out, you mean, the powerhouses of the Temple of Kongming have brought an army to attack Li Du? Ji Tianxing nodded. Lai Tian's expression and eyes immediately became much more serious. Chapter 45-47. Skyrending knew his own limitations. The beast tribes under his and Yan Li's command were too weak to be mentioned in the same breath as the 2 god palaces. If the Kongming Temple's experts were to lead an army to attack Li capital, the beast race would definitely suffer a crushing defeat. However, Skyrending was not overly worried. The entire unknown land was the beast race's territory. It was sufficiently vast. So what if the Kongming Temple's army managed to occupy Li capital? Could it be that the Kongming Temple was interested in this primordial forest and wanted to build a city here? Skyrending and Yanli could escape with their people and hide in a faraway place. They would not engage in battle with the Kongming Temple's army. When that happened, the Kongming Temple's army could only return empty-handed. Hence, Skyrending was not afraid of the Kongming Temple's invasion. He was only pondering. The Kongming Temple had never thought much of the beast race, so why would they suddenly attack Li capital? How did the Kongming Temple know of Li capital's existence and accurately locate its location? With this in mind, Skyrending finally understood. Damn it! I was too benevolent after all. I let those desolate race godly monarchs leave after 100 years of slavery. It must be those darn slaves who tipped off the Kongming Temple. If I knew this would happen, I would have listened to Yanli and not let them live or never let them go. Ji Tianxing originally wanted to be frank and tell Skyrending the truth. The Kongming Temple's experts had chased him all the way to Li capital. However, Skyrending had said such a thing. Ji Tianxing was stunned for a moment before he explained, Skyrending, the reason you mentioned obviously exists. If not, the Kongming Temple's experts would not have found this place. But what this emperor wants to say is that the Kongming Temple's experts are here for this emperor. Lai Tian wasn't surprised at all. Instead, he smiled. I knew it. I've long guessed that you have a grudge against the Kongming Temple. Perhaps you met me because you were escaping from their pursuit. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked, I'll be frank with you and tell you the reason. It was me who brought the disaster of war to Li Du. Aren't you angry? Lai Tian curled his lips disapprovingly and said, What do I have to be angry about? The beasts and the Kongming Temple had always been enemies. Even if you didn't appear, there will be a day when we will go to war with Kongming Temple. What's more, you've helped us so much and built 2 defensive formations for Li City. I can't thank you enough, so why would I blame you? At this point, Skysplitter patted Ji Tianxing's shoulder and said in a heroic manner, Long Tian, you think highly of us beasts. As long as you are willing, we will be your allies. Didn't you insist that we were working together? Now we have officially formed an alliance to resist the Kongming Temple together. The desolate race's discrimination and prejudice against the beasts was innate and deep-rooted. There was no way for both sides to reconcile, so they could only be enemies. And Ji Tianxing did not have any prejudice against the beasts. There was no grudge between the two, so he was the best choice for an ally. On this point Lai Tian knew it very well. If you can think that way, this emperor is relieved. Ji Tianxing could tell that Lai Tian's words came from the bottom of his heart. It wasn't a lie, so he revealed a gratified smile. Lai Tian did not waste any more time as he hurriedly asked, "Since the Kongming Temple's army is here, I won't be in reclusion. I'll find Yanli in a while and explain the situation to him. I'll immediately give the order for all the citizens of Li City to be prepared for battle. If our numbers are insufficient, I'll get the various territorial lords to send more citizens as reinforcements." The beasts had an innate passion for killing and battle, so they were not afraid. Just thinking of the impending battle with the Kongming Temple's desolate race, Lai Tian was even looking forward to it. Ji Tianxing shook his head and advised, "Lai Tian, this battle is no trifling matter. Don't let your guard down. The Kongming Temple is very determined. It is very likely that they have mobilized a few temple lords. We should focus on defense and figure out the enemy's numbers and plans first." A few hours ago, this emperor had already used a mystic technique to probe the surrounding 200,000 miles. There was no sign of the Kongming Temple's army. However, this emperor has a feeling that they are nearby, spying on us from the shadows. Lai Tian also realized the seriousness of the matter as he asked in a deep voice, "Why don't I send elite scouts out to investigate the situation?" Ji Tianxing considered for a moment and said, "The Kongming Temple's experts might be secretly monitoring Li City. Once you send scouts out, they will definitely discover them. We can only bide our time and pretend that we have not sensed the danger. You have to send orders to the surrounding citizens to quietly approach Li City and monitor the surrounding 500,000 miles. Within 500,000 miles of Li City, there were at least 10,000 divine beasts and ferocious beasts. Furthermore, they were all quite powerful. However, when Ji Tianxing preached the Tao, half of the beasts had rushed to Li City to listen to the preaching. Now there were still a few thousand divine beasts and ferocious beasts outside, which should be of some use. Lai Tian considered for a moment and felt that it was feasible. He hurriedly nodded and said, "All right, leave this matter to me. What other plans do you have?" Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, "Not for the time being. Tell all the citizens that the preaching of the Tao will be suspended for a period of time. Let them focus on cultivating and preparing for battle." Following that, the two of them split up and began taking action. Ji Tianxing returned to his room in the Divine Palace and conjured the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda. He entered the distorted space-time to recover his divine power. Lai Tian first went to awaken Yanli, who had just begun her closed-door cultivation. Then he issued various orders and arranged various affairs. Not long after, the news of the Kongming Temple's army's attack spread throughout Li City. The previously cheerful and lively atmosphere immediately became solemn and austere. Tens of thousands of beasts smelled the scent of war and slaughter. They quickly entered a state of preparation for battle. It couldn't be helped. Bloodthirsty and warlike were the nature of the beasts. Even after they had awakened their spiritual intelligence, they were controlled and educated. They wouldn't kill the innocent like before. However, when a strong enemy came to their doorstep, there was no need to boost their morale. All the beasts were united against a common enemy and joined the battle without regard for their own safety. This was the nature of the beast. It was also a trait that many other races envied. 2 hours later, the entire Li City became much quieter. Even the many beasts' divine kings who lingered outside Ji Tianxing's divine palace left one after another. Tens of thousands of beasts returned to their respective territories and consciously formed teams. They began to cultivate and conserve their energy. The pill refinement and weapon refinement workshops also sped up their progress. They spared no expense in producing divine pills, weapons, and armor. The 18 territories' leaders and many generals also began to get busy. They used what they had learned before to formulate battle tactics for the warriors. In particular, the beasts decided to try out the combined battle formation that Ji Tianxing had taught them. Chapter 45-48. Ji Tianxing had set up the grand formation of Li capital to separate it from the outside world. Both the Kongming Temple and the beast race knew of each other's existence, but they pretended not to know. Both sides did their best to remain silent and bide their time so that the other side wouldn't notice. At this moment the most anxious people weren't the beast race, but the 4 temple masters. They were almost certain that the young god emperor of the desolate race was in the great formation ahead of them. As long as they could break through the defensive formation and enter Li capital, they would be able to capture the flood god emperor. If they could kill the 2 beast race ancestors along the way, they could eliminate the beast race as a major threat. The uneducated beast race was weak to begin with. If they lost 2 god emperor realm ancestors, they would be nothing more than a tray of loose sand waiting to be slaughtered. The 4 temple masters couldn't wait to see what would happen. But the first temple master had already ordered that no one was to act rashly until he arrived. The 4 temple masters could only suppress their excitement and silently pray that the flood god emperor wouldn't notice anything amiss. In addition, the first temple master also needed to arrive as soon as possible. Both sides were in a tense situation, so time seemed to pass very slowly. It had only been 2 days, but it felt like 2 months had passed for the 4 palace masters and the numerous guards. The first temple master naturally wouldn't arrive that quickly. According to the message sent by his guard captain, he would only arrive in about 3 days. At this moment, more than 2,000 divine beasts and vicious beasts within 1,000,000 kilometers of Li capital received a secret order and began to move. As usual, they leisurely wandered around their respective areas of activity, as if they were patrolling their own territories. But they were different from usual. While they appeared to be unconcerned, they were actually searching their surroundings with all their might in order to find the traces left behind by the Kongming temple. Moreover, after they finished patrolling their territories, they still had to continue in the direction of Li capital and conduct a carpet search along the way. Of course, according to the 2 ancestors' orders, the lower and middle god king beasts didn't need to conceal their presence. Only a small number of upper god king beasts, as elites, needed to conceal their presence so that the experts of the Kongming temple wouldn't notice. After the beasts began their operations, they didn't find anything for a day. They didn't discover the Kongming temple's army, nor did they find any useful clues. But on the 2nd day things took a turn for the better. After a few hundred beasts approached Li capital, a few upper god king beasts discovered something amiss 300,000 kilometers away from Li capital. Some beasts didn't discover any traces of the Kongming temple army, but they sensed a dangerous aura hidden nearby. It was as if their natural enemies were lurking in the darkness, watching their movements at all times, ready to rush out at any time and chop them into pieces. 2 of the more powerful beasts, due to their innate abilities, discovered that there was a gigantic shadow hidden between the mountains and rivers. With their experience and knowledge, they could only guess that the hazy black shadow was a high-level divine ship of the Temple of Kongming, but they couldn't find out more information. One of the beasts was more cautious. After reporting the news to the Sky Splitter ancestor, he left quietly. As for the other beast race, their way of doing things was more radical. It was also possible that they were eager to make contributions. It mustered its courage to approach the black figure, hoping to figure out how many desolate race experts were hidden in the battleship. As a result, when it was a few hundred miles away from the Black Shadow, it was mercilessly attacked and killed. The overwhelming pillar of divine power instantly drowned it, giving it no chance to resist or escape. It was blasted into smithereens on the spot. Reality proved that when it discovered the divine ship of the Kongming temple, the elite guards guarding the divine ship had already discovered it. When it approached the divine warship in an attempt to break through its concealment, the guards operating the divine warship had no choice but to kill it. That was a decisive decision. That unlucky beast race god king didn't manage to pass the news to Sky Splitter. However, the disturbance caused by the several hundred pillars of divine power was too great. Everyone within 100,000 miles could see the light or sense the ripples of divine power. The beast race god king's tragic death also exposed the location of the 3rd Hallmaster's ship. After the incident, the surrounding beasts who sensed the commotion hurriedly sent a message to Li City to report the situation to Ancestor Sky Splitter. The desolate race godly monarchs who were controlling the divine cruiser were also vexed. They could only quietly change their positions. Late at night on the 4th day, Xianxia ended his reclusive cultivation and left the distorted space-time, returning to the divine palace. 4 days had passed outside, but he had already cultivated in the distorted space-time for 200 days. The divine power he had previously expended had completely recovered, and he was once again in peak condition. The The strange cloud bird who was guarding outside the divine palace hurriedly reported to him that Ancestor Sky Splitter had urgent matters to discuss with him. Ji Tianxing guessed that it had something to do with the Kongming Temple, and hurriedly got the strange cloud bird to invite Sky Splitter over. In less than 50 breaths, Sky Splitter rushed into the divine palace and appeared in front of Ji Tianxing. The two of them met in the study. After Sky Splitter greeted him, he went straight to the point and said, "Long Tian, your method is indeed useful. We have found the other party's location." Ji Tianxing's eyes lit up, revealing a look of anticipation. He said, "Tell me about the situation." Sky Splitter explained, "Yen Li and I contacted more than 2,000 godly monarch realm citizens and got them to investigate the situation around Li City. Most of our people have found nothing, but 2 of our people have sent us news. One of them was 300,000 miles to the east of Li City. A citizen of the 9th tier godly monarch realm saw a black shadow there. It was a 1,000-eyed spider, and it had a special ability that allowed it to see through some camouflage and mystery techniques. According to its judgment, that black shadow should be a divine worship. However, that divine worship was of a very high grade, and it was unable to find out more information, so it could only retreat quietly. The other one was 300,000 miles to the north of Li City. It was also a citizen of the 9th tier godly monarch realm, and he had a special ability. He also saw a black shadow. However, he was more daring. After he sent us the news, he tried to get close to that black shadow to see what it was. In the end, he did not send back any more news. According to the citizens nearby, they saw a dazzling divine light at that location, and it seemed like a battle had taken place there. However, when they rushed to the location of the incident, they only saw ruins and could not find that citizen. Therefore, that poor fellow must have been killed by the experts of the Kongming Temple. After listening to Sky Splitter's explanation, Ji Tianxing frowned and muttered to himself, "2 divine worships? One is 300,000 miles to the east of Li City, and the other is 300,000 miles to the north? No wonder I could not detect the army of the Kongming Temple when I used my secret technique. I did not expect them to be so cunning, hiding in the divine worships and maintaining a distance of 300,000 miles from Li City. However, they are surrounding us, so there must be more than 2 divine worships." Chapter 45-49. The news brought by Lai Tian confirmed Ji Tianxing's previous conjecture. The Kongming Temple had indeed sent a few god emperors to lead an army to attack Li City. Moreover, those few god emperors were very vigilant and hid 300,000 miles away to prevent their whereabouts from being exposed. If he hadn't made preparations and sent Lai Tian to investigate, he wouldn't have been able to find the whereabouts of those few temple masters. Luckily, a few beast race experts had made contributions and found the location of the Kongming temple masters. Even if one of the beast race experts had sacrificed himself, it was still a worthy death and was very valuable. Lai Tian's expression became more and more solemn as he asked Ji Tianxing in a deep voice, "Currently, only 2 Kongming temple masters can confirm their whereabouts and positions. Long Tian, according to your conjecture, how many temple masters will the Kongming Temple send this time?" Although the beast race and the Kongming Temple were enemies, both sides hadn't started a direct and large-scale conflict. In comparison, Ji Tianxing had a better understanding of the Kongming Temple, so he wanted to ask Ji Tianxing for the specific situation. Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a moment before answering with a serious expression. "If I were the head temple master of the Kongming Temple, I would definitely do my best and send out 4 temple masters to carry out this mission. Since I'm going to take action, I'll send out 4 temple masters to surround Li City and not let go of any direction." Lai Tian thought for a moment and nodded, "Although this conjecture is very bold and I don't really believe it. But what you said makes a lot of sense. If the head temple master of the Kongming Temple is a very courageous and decisive expert, he would definitely do his best and kill in one blow. After all, in a situation where we're not on guard, destroying Li City in one fell swoop would be too beneficial for them." Ji Tianxing stared at the defensive formation that enveloped Li City and said earnestly, "If it's only 1 or 2 temple masters, I can still block them with the 2 formations that I've set up, and even have the chance to defeat and annihilate them. However, this time around it is very likely that all 4 hall masters will be present. Merely relying on those 2 defensive formations is far from enough." Sky Splitter raised his brows and asked, "Do you mean that we have to set up even more formations? But I've already set up more than 300 formations around Li City." Before it could finish, Ji Tianxing had already turned his head to look at it. Even though Ji Tianxing didn't say anything, Lai Tian had already lost his confidence and simply shut his mouth. Then it smiled in shame and mocked itself. Alright, I admit that the things I set up are not formations at all. Ji Tianxing didn't want to waste time with it. He said in a deep voice, we don't have much time to waste. We're about to take action. Furthermore, you must fully cooperate with me this time. Lai Tian had just learned 2 emperor-level grand arrays, and his attainments in array Dao had greatly improved. He was itching to try it out. Hearing Ji Tianxing's words, it nodded its head in agreement without any hesitation. Subsequently, Ji Tianxing flew to the sky above Li City. Surveying the entire situation, he frowned and pondered on how to set up the formation system. The divine formations he wanted to set up were at least 100. Not only did those 100 divine formations have their own functions, but they also had to cooperate with each other and combine to produce an even greater effect. Furthermore, what kind of divine formation should be set up, and what kind of divine formation should be connected to the surroundings, all of these required precise calculations and arrangements. This was the array Dao attainments that a top-notch array Dao grandmaster possessed. With Lai Tian's current level, it was simply unimaginable. After a short 10 breaths, Ji Tianxing already had an answer in his heart. He opened up the spatial passageway of the god-slaying battleship and summoned many god-king powerhouses following him. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Divine light flickered. More than 30 followers and close to 100 high-ranking god-kings appeared in the sky above Li City. Time was of the essence. In order to complete the setup of the grand array as soon as possible, Ji Tianxing needed the assistance and cooperation of these powerhouses. After all, these people were the most elite powerhouses under his command. Furthermore, they were all proficient in array Dao. It was very easy for them to set up a king-level divine formation. Lai Tian also quickly gathered more than 300 god-king powerhouses from the Beast clan. He led these god-kings from the Beast clan to cooperate with Ji Tianxing's actions. Ji Tianxing was in the center of Li City. He was in control of the entire situation. His hands formed a divine seal as he shot out thousands of dazzling divine lights that landed in all directions. Even though there were more than 10,000 divine lights and they drew an arc in the sky as though they were weaving a huge net, there was no chaos at all. At the same time, Ji Tianxing used his divine consciousness to send a voice transmission to his followers and Beast clan powerhouses to give orders. More than 400 God King powerhouses were divided into 100 small teams. They all received different orders. Even if their array Dao attainments were insufficient, they only needed to listen to Ji Tianxing's orders and cast their spells according to the prescribed order. Swish swish swish. After receiving the orders, the 100 small teams quickly spread out and landed in all directions of Li City. Everyone followed Ji Tianxing's orders and released their divine powers to start setting up the array. Lai Tian was shocked when he saw this scene. Not far away, Yanli was gathering the Beast clan citizens to form a guard and was actively preparing for battle. Seeing this magnificent and dazzling scene, he was also dumbfounded. He was incomparably shocked. Ji Tianxing was in control of the entire situation. He was commanding more than 400 God King powerhouses to set up the array. Moreover, he was setting up 100 array formations at the same time. This was simply too terrifying. Lai Tian and Yanli could not imagine how powerful one's array Dao attainments would be. How precise were the calculations and analysis needed to complete such a magnificent feat? Not only were the two of them shocked by Ji Tianxing's mysterious methods, but the Beast clan citizens who were quickly gathering in Li City were also shocked. They all exclaimed in amazement. Most of the Beast clan citizens did not understand what kind of array Ji Tianxing was setting up. But they could all guess that Ji Tianxing was so cautious and with such great fanfare. The array formations he was setting up were definitely stronger than the previous two. In the past, Li City was very simple and crude. It could be said that there was almost no defense. But from now on, Ji Tianxing would take charge of and set up a grand formation that could turn Li City into an impregnable fortress. However, Yanli quickly woke up from his shock. He knew that the situation was urgent and did not dare to delay. He hurriedly ordered all the Beast clan citizens to move faster. Those Beast clan citizens did not dare to be in a daze and started to move. Time passed silently. The divine power light pillars in the sky above Li City also became more concentrated. It gradually increased to more than 30,000. Ji Tianxing continued to cast spells, shooting out even more divine power light pillars and pouring them into the 100 divine arrays. The casting speed became faster and faster. The 400 God King powerhouses also gradually understood Ji Tianxing's intentions. Their casting movements became smoother and their efficiency increased by several times. 100 divine arrays of different sizes and effects gradually took shape and revealed their magnificence. Chapter 45-50. Even though Li Capital was enveloped by the two defensive arrays and could not see the situation inside clearly. But after 3rd Hall Master and 4th Hall Master's tracks were exposed, they immediately contacted the other 3 Hall Masters and recounted the incident to them. The moment the few Hall Masters heard that there were Beast Race Divine King powerhouses approaching, they guessed that Sky Splitter and Yanli had taken action. The 4 Hall Masters could all conclude that this was absolutely not a coincidence, but the Beast Race's probing and searching. Simply speaking, the Beast Race already knew that they were coming, and they were actively preparing for war. The 4 Hall Masters unanimously agreed that they had to launch an attack immediately, taking advantage of the Beast Race's insufficient preparations to breach Li Capital in one fell swoop. Otherwise, the longer the delay, the more dreams there would be. Except the 4 Hall Masters reached a consensus, but they still had to report to Head Hall Master for him to make a decision. Head Hall Master was still on the way and still needed a day to reach. After hearing the news, he also knew that the situation was urgent. But he did not go to the scene personally and could not command the battle. He seriously had no confidence in his heart. Not that he was afraid of Ji Tianxing and the Beast Race, but he did not have confidence in the 4 Hall Masters. After all, 2nd Hall Master and 4th Hall Master had suffered losses in Ji Tianxing's hands before. Head Hall Master had no choice but to worry that the 4 Hall Masters' hot-bloodedness would get to their heads and they would very easily fall into Ji Tianxing's trap, resulting in serious losses. You all change positions immediately, still maintain a distance of 300,000 miles and continue to monitor Li Capital. Before this seed arrives, you all absolutely cannot act rashly without thinking. Thinking over and over again, Head Hall Master still made the decision and issued this order. After the 4 Hall Masters received the order, they were all like frosted eggplants, wilting on the spot. Their hot-bloodedness and fighting spirit could only be suppressed. Indignant, the 4 Hall Masters carried out the order and changed positions while transmitting messages to discuss this matter. Previously, the Beast Race might only have suspected that we arrived, so they sent those Beast Race Divine Kings to probe. But our whereabouts have already been exposed. The Beast Race must be actively preparing for war right now. Now is the best time to attack, taking advantage of the fact that the Beast Race is flustered and not fully prepared yet. If we launch an attack at the same time, we can definitely breach Li Capital. We all understand the logic, but Head Hall Master is unwilling to relent. We can't go against his orders either. Talking about it, Head Hall Master still refuses to believe us. Forget it, change positions first. In any case, there's still a day before the 1st Hall Master arrives. The 4 Palace Masters had some complaints, but they were still able to control their emotions and did not continue this topic. In less than 2 hours they had all changed their positions. They chose a new hiding place and went into hiding. With the previous lesson in mind, they were even more cautious this time. They hid even deeper, and there was no way they would be discovered by the Beast Race's God Kings. Perhaps it was fate, or perhaps it was a blessing from the heavens. The seemingly accidental decision of both parties would definitely lead to an inevitable outcome. Ji Tianxing only felt that time was of the essence and could not be delayed. He immediately made the decision to lead Sky Splitter and over 400 God Kings to set up the formation. At that time he didn't know about the Kongming Temple's plan, nor did he know what kind of impact and hardships Li City would face. He only knew that he and the Beast Race had to give it their all. They couldn't afford to take any chances. On the other side, the 1st Palace Master had his own concerns, so he did not allow the 4 Palace Masters to lead the army to attack. If he had known about the situation inside Li City, if he had known that Ji Tianxing was leading countless experts to set up the formation, given his boldness, he might not have allowed the 4 Palace Masters to hold back their troops. Instead, he would have ordered them to attack immediately. But there were no ifs. This was fate. The 1st Palace Master's decision gave Ji Tianxing and the Beast Race a chance to catch their breath. In the following day, Ji Tianxing, Sky Splitter, and over 400 God King experts did not stop for a moment. They set up the formation with all their might. Around Li City, over 100 divine formations with different effects rose from the ground at an extremely fast speed. When the divine formations were 70% complete, over 400 God King experts had basically grasped the content of their mission. At this time, Ji Tianxing did not need to lead. He only needed to command and guide. Many God King experts already knew what they had to do and what they had to do next. Hence, at the same time that over 100 divine formations were gradually formed, they also began to link up with each other and connect their divine powers. Seeing each divine formation flickering with dazzling divine light and connecting in a crisscross pattern to form a huge formation cluster that surrounded Li City, everyone was stunned. Only at this moment did they truly understand Ji Tianxing's intentions. The same thought appeared in the minds of all the beast race experts. Formations can be set up like this? This is unbelievable. As for Ji Tianxing's followers and God Kings, they were also shocked in their hearts. But they were used to it. In the years that they followed Ji Tianxing, they had long seen miracles that were even more shocking than this. Finally, an entire day passed. The first palace master, who hurried with all his might, led over 1,000 elite experts and arrived near Li City on a divine ship. The magnificent divine ship that was over 100,000 feet long and emitted a sacred and dignified aura. It arrived 300,000 miles west of Li City and met up with the fifth palace master. Seeing the first palace master's divine ship arrive, the fifth palace master hurriedly led his trusted generals and flew into the sky to welcome them. Greetings, first palace master. Seeing the first palace master fly out of the divine ship, the fifth palace master and the others hurriedly bowed. After enduring for an entire day, they could finally begin. The fifth palace master and the others were all in high spirits and full of fighting spirit. However, the first palace master's expression and aura were still calm and determined. He waved his hand to indicate that everyone could dispense with the formalities. Then he led a dozen or so trusted experts across the sky and walked forward. At the same time, he released an invisible and vast divine consciousness to investigate the situation in Li City. He had just arrived at the battlefield and would not be in a hurry to launch an attack. He would first investigate the situation in Li City and then formulate a strategy. The fifth palace master was a little anxious. He hurriedly sent a message to the other three palace masters, indicating that the first palace master had arrived. Then he said to the first palace master, "First palace master, it has been an entire day since our whereabouts were exposed. We should not waste any more time. Please give the order to attack as soon as possible. The elites that we are leading have been impatient for a long time." The first palace master stared expressionlessly in the direction of Li City. His divine consciousness was probing the divine formation of Li City, trying to peer through the formation to see the situation inside. Hearing the fifth palace master's urging, he said in a deep voice, "You have waited for so long. A little more time won't matter, right? As the saying goes, know yourself and know your enemy and you will be victorious in every battle. You are all palace masters and have held the divine power for so many years. Why are you still so impatient? It is precisely because of this that I am not at ease with you." The fifth palace master was lectured. He looked a little embarrassed, but he could not refute. After all, the second palace master and the fourth palace master had indeed suffered losses at the hands of Ji Tianxing. The first palace master probed for a moment. His divine consciousness had just penetrated the divine formation of Li City and was about to spy on the situation inside Li City. At this moment, two powerful divine consciousnesses suddenly attacked and fiercely blasted toward the first palace master. Chapter 45-51. Suddenly attacked, the first palace master's first reaction was to immediately dodge. He immediately withdrew his consciousness, not giving the two consciousnesses a chance. Although he knew that the two consciousnesses that attacked him were not as strong as him. Even if he chose to resist, he might not be seriously injured. But he had always been cautious. Without sufficient preparation, he would not fight with the other party. The two consciousnesses' attack missed and did not pursue the first palace master. They also quickly withdrew. The defensive formation that enveloped Li City was operating as usual, flashing with dazzling light. The first palace master also stopped investigating the situation inside Li City. He frowned, his eyes containing a hint of killing intent. Seeing his strange expression, the fifth palace master hurriedly asked with concern, "First palace master, what's the situation?" In fact, the fifth palace master also sensed that the first palace master's consciousness had just entered Li City and then retracted like lightning. There was no need to guess. The first palace master's consciousness must have been attacked. But the fifth palace master asked even though he knew the answer. He wanted to know more about the situation. The first palace master stared in the direction of Li City and said expressionlessly, "The two defensive formations protecting Li City are both emperor-level divine formations. Although their grade is not too high, they are very precise. Moreover, the method of setting up the formations is very strange. Even I have never seen it before. It can be seen that the god emperor who set up the two defensive formations is very proficient in setting up formations." Everyone knew that the person who set up the defensive formations for Li City was the young god emperor they had been chasing. Even if the two sides were enemies, the first palace master did not lose his bias and gave a fair evaluation. The fifth palace master nodded to show that he understood. He then asked, "Inside the formation, are there any movements of the beast experts in Li City?" The first palace master said in a deep voice, "The surroundings of Li City are being monitored by you all. You can be sure that the beasts have not escaped. Since they did not escape and stayed in Li City, they will definitely gather all their forces and fight with all their strength. With the help of the young god emperor who is proficient in formations, they will definitely set up more formations to assist them in battle." The trusted generals and experts around him nodded in agreement. The fifth palace master understood. It turned out that the first palace master did not investigate the situation inside Li City at all. He was just making subjective guesses. Of course, the first palace master's guess was right. A day ago, the fifth palace master and the others had guessed this point. At that time they had proposed to attack. In order not to anger the first palace master, the fifth palace master could not bring up the old matter. He could only ask tentatively, "First palace master, when will we attack? If we delay, the beasts will be fully prepared and set up more formations. It will be disadvantageous to us." The first palace master shook his head and said in a low voice, "How can it be so easy to set up an emperor-grade divine array? How can it be done in a few days? We already have victory in our grasp, so why are we in such a hurry? I will first, the first palace master. At most one day later we will attack. Even though the fifth palace master did not quite agree with the first palace master's steady way of doing things, the first palace master had already stated that he would definitely launch an attack a day later. Thus he did not say anything more. After that, the fifth hallmaster stayed behind while the first hallmaster left in the battleship. The 10,000-foot-long battleship flew around Li City, observing the situation and meeting with the second, third, and fourth palace masters. 6 hours later, the first palace master had met with the 4 palace masters. After fully understanding the situation of each palace master's troops, he began to cast spells to investigate the defenses of Li City. At the same time inside Li City, Ji Tianxing, Lai Tian and more than 400 God King experts had been continuously setting up formations for 30 hours. Everyone had used up a lot of divine power. Many beasts' God Kings had shallow attainments in formations, so they had used up even more power. Even Ji Tianxing, who was in charge of setting up the formations and controlling the overall situation, was tired and needed to rest. Fortunately, the 100 Emperor God formations were finally completed. Many divine formations began to operate smoothly and joined together to form a huge Emperor-level divine formation. In this way, Li City had 3 Emperor God formations which were equivalent to 3 layers of barriers. The outermost layer of barriers had ordinary power, the middle layer of barriers had stronger power, and the newly completed third layer of barriers was the most powerful. Ji Tianxing believed that with the protection of these 3 layers of barriers, they should be able to neutralize most of the Kongming Temple's troops. After setting up the formations, he immediately ordered everyone involved to recuperate and recover their divine power. Just a few hours ago he sensed a powerful divine sense passing through the 2 layers of defensive formations, trying to investigate the situation inside Li City. At that time he was in charge of setting up the formations and could not meet the attack personally. But Lai Tian and Lai Tian attacked at the same time, releasing powerful divine senses to intercept that divine sense. Unexpectedly, that divine sense was very cautious and did not collide with Lai Tian and Lai Tian before withdrawing. Ji Tianxing realized that the Kongming Temple's palace masters could not wait and were about to attack. As expected, just as the people involved in setting up the formations were resting, the 3 layers of defensive formations protecting Li City flashed with divine light again and fluctuated violently. Without looking, one knew that it was the God Emperor using a secret technique to forcibly pass through the 3 layers of barriers and spy on the situation inside Li City. Ji Tianxing, who was recuperating, quickly released his divine sense and used a special technique to condense an invisible divine sense blade and slashed at that divine sense. Swoosh. Many beasts saw that near the 3rd layer of golden light barrier, the air suddenly exploded with a deafening sound and a black crack appeared in the sky. Only Lai Tian and Lai Tian could see clearly that Ji Tianxing's divine sense blade had cut an unfamiliar divine sense chain. That invisible divine sense chain penetrated the 3 layers of barriers like tentacles and was spying on the situation inside Li City. Suddenly cut by the divine sense blade, the divine sense chain was caught off guard and was immediately cut off. Although the divine sense chain suffered a loss, it did not withdraw. Instead, it exerted more effort to drill into Li City and quickly investigate the surrounding situation. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing frowned as a bad premonition arose in his heart. Cut by my divine sense blade, it did not collapse on the spot and can continue to investigate without being affected. Which palace master's divine sense is this? How could it be so powerful? In Ji Tianxing's view, only the Kongming Temple's palace master did not appear. The strongest person was the 2nd palace master. But he had fought with the 2nd palace master before and knew very well that the 2nd palace master's strength did not have such a powerful divine sense. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing suddenly thought of a possibility. Suddenly, his pupils shrank and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. Could it be that the 1st palace master personally took action? Damn it! The 1st palace master has not left the temple headquarters for tens of thousands of years. This time he came out in full force. They really think highly of me. Chapter 45-52. From the strength of the divine sense chain, Ji Tianxing inferred that the 1st hallmaster had arrived. Since the 1st hallmaster who claimed to never leave the temple headquarters had arrived, then the other 4 hallmasters must have also arrived. There was no doubt that they had turned out in full force. Ji Tianxing felt the pressure and was also worried about the survival of the beast race. However, now was not the time to consider this problem. The 1st hallmaster's divine sense chain was still shuttling back and forth in the Li City, and even spread out an invisible divine sense net to quickly investigate the situation. With his strength and means, if Ji Tianxing did not stop him, he would definitely be able to investigate the situation of the Li City's defenses within 10 breaths. There was no other way. The situation in the Li City was too simple. Not to mention the hundreds of houses and buildings, tens of thousands of beast race people had already been divided into dozens of teams and scattered around the Li City, ready to fight at any time. There was also the 3rd layer of defense barrier, which was also composed of hundreds of large arrays. The 1st hallmaster seemed to have also discovered this point, and his divine sense chain was probing the position of each large array, looking for the array foundation. The situation was urgent and urgent. Ji Tianxing once again urged his divine sense, using his divine sense secret technique with all his strength, and slashed out 9 divine sense swords. Swish swish swish. Invisible, 9 divine sense swords slashed down one after another, surrounding the divine sense chain, making it unable to escape. The main task of the divine sense chain was to investigate the military situation, not to fight with anyone. However, surrounded by Ji Tianxing's 9 divine sense swords, it had no way to escape and could only fight back. Swish swish swish. In the blink of an eye, the divine sense chain scattered and disintegrated, turning into 9 divine sense blades, colliding fiercely with the divine sense swords. Bang 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 bang. In the next moment, the divine sense blades and the divine sense swords collided fiercely, bursting out with a dull bang. The powerful impact cracked the surrounding sky, bursting open more than a dozen pitch-black space cracks. The 9 divine sense swords all collapsed, turning into fragments and dissipating in the sky. Ji Tianxing was also shocked pale, spitting out a mouthful of blood, and his consciousness was briefly dizzy. There was nothing he could do about it. If his sword of divine sense was defeated, he would definitely suffer a backlash. As for the 1st palace master's 9 blades of consciousness, 6 of them collapsed on the spot, leaving 3 intact. From this, it could be seen that the Lord Hallmaster's strength and divine sense were indeed stronger than Ji Tianxing's. Shua. After successfully resolving Ji Tianxing's siege, The 3 spiritual consciousness blades quickly condensed and transformed into a spiritual consciousness chain. Even though this chain of consciousness was much smaller than before, it still sped through the Li capital, probing the array bases of many divine arrays. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was busy channeling his internal energy to suppress his injuries and heal his damaged soul, no one was able to resist that chain of soul power. At this moment, Skylai and Yan Li roared angrily at the same time, releasing their soul consciousness together. They attacked the soul consciousness chain furiously. The 2 of them attacked from left and right, forcing the spiritual chain to have nowhere to run. After running half a circle around Li Du, it was finally hit. Boom. Skylai and Yan Li's attacks were too violent. Their soul consciousness collided with the first Palace Master's divine sense chain, creating a thunderous sound that reverberated in the sky above Li Du at that moment. A pitch-black hole split open in the sky, but it blossomed with a dazzling white light. The violent impact made the whole Li tremble. Fortunately, Skylai and Yan Li's full-strength attack destroyed the divine sense chain, causing it to dissipate into nothingness. However, Skylai and Yan Li's soul consciousness were also shaken. They panted violently and circulated their qi for a long time before returning to normal. Ji Tianxing circulated his qi to repair his soul consciousness while transmitting his voice to Skylai and Yan Li. The situation has changed. It's more serious than I expected. That divine sense chain just now should be the first Palace Masters. In other words, the Kongming Temple is likely to come out in full force. Skylai and Yan Li were also circulating their qi to heal their injuries. When they suddenly heard this news, they were shocked and full of worry. What should we do? How could the Kongming Temple be so determined? They actually came out in full force. This is unprecedented. In their memory, this was the first time such a thing had happened since the establishment of the Kongming Temple. And the current beast race simply could not withstand the full force of the Kongming Temple's encirclement and suppression. Ji Tianxing said in a deep voice, "You must be mentally prepared. It's impossible to win with just this bit of strength in Li capital. No matter what method you use, you must immediately inform all the overlords and gather all the people as much as possible to reinforce Li capital." Outside Li capital, 100,000 miles north, the first Palace Master's 10,000-foot divine warship stopped high in the sky, motionless. At the top of the divine warship, the first Palace Master stood proudly, his robes fluttering and his long hair fluttering. The moment the divine sense chain was completely destroyed, he also suffered a strong backlash. His body shook violently and he opened his mouth to spit out an arrow of blood. The expressions of the 6 experts standing behind him changed when they saw that he was injured, and they subconsciously let out cries of surprise. First Palace Master. Lord Palace Master, are you all right? Unfortunately, these 6 confidants were not God Emperors, but only peak divine kings. Even if they saw that the first Palace Master was injured, they could do nothing. The first Palace Master lowered his head with a pale face, raised his sleeve to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth, and waved his hand to everyone. "I'm fine, it's just that my divine sense suffered a backlash. It's just a minor injury, nothing serious," he explained in a low voice, and after that he silently circulated his energy to suppress the injury and repair the damaged divine sense. Only then did the 6 confidants feel relieved, as if relieved of a heavy burden. At this time, the 3rd Palace Master, who was standing at the side, asked, "First Palace Master, with your strength, who in Li capital is your opponent? How did you get injured?" The first Palace Master said expressionlessly, "If it's a one-on-one fight, naturally no one is my opponent. However, I didn't use my ultimate skill to fight with them. I only wanted to investigate Li Du's defenses. When my divine sense entered Li capital, it was besieged by 3 God Emperors, and I was in a very passive situation which led to my injury. Of course, those 3 guys didn't get any benefits either." The 3rd Palace Master nodded to show that he understood, and his eyes lit up with hope. He sneered and said, "In that case, we can be sure that there are only 3 God Emperors in Li capital. If Lord Palace Master can find out the situation of their defenses, then we will definitely win." The first Palace Master nodded slightly and ordered, "Pass down the order, let all the soldiers prepare for battle. After 2 hours I will give the battle order. As for the battle plan and the target, I will inform you later." After that, the first Palace Master did not speak anymore and teleported back to the warship, and took a divine pill to heal his injuries. The third palace master's face lit up, and he quickly took out a communication jade slip to inform the other 3 palace masters. Moreover, he also rushed back to the warship at the fastest speed to command the soldiers under his command. Not long after, the 4 teams lurking around Li capital removed their stealth state, and openly arranged themselves in battle formations, and approached Li capital with murderous intent. Chapter 45-53. Even though the first hallmaster had yet to give the order for the battle and laid out the specific battle plan. However, the 4 hallmasters and their elite experts had already removed their concealment and were approaching Li City with murderous intent. After all, they had already received the order to prepare for battle. They had to rush to the surroundings of Li City in advance and lay out the battle formation for the attack. At the same time, the 4 hallmasters did not forget to contact the first hallmaster to ask about the attack plan at any time while commanding their soldiers. Very quickly 2 hours passed. The first hallmaster had already made up his mind and came up with a battle plan. He then sent the messages to the 4 hallmasters one by one. The specific content was not suitable to be described in detail. However, the first hallmaster had always been cautious and steady in his actions. When he gave the order for an all-out attack, he also arranged all the backup plans. After the 4 hallmasters received the order, they immediately felt that the first hallmaster had arranged everything properly and the plan was perfect. They were all filled with confidence and fighting spirit. Hence, the 4 hallmasters gave the order at the same time to lead the 1,000 experts under their command to launch the attack. Swish, swish, swish. In an instant, the 4 directions of Li City, thousands of miles away, lit up with dazzling divine art radiance at the same time. The divine art radiance that covered the sky carried the power to destroy heaven and earth. Like a torrential flood, it poured down on the defensive formation of Li City. This was the divine art that the 4 hallmasters and the 4,000 elite experts released together. It was very powerful. Moreover, the first hallmaster was also 10,000 miles away from Li City and was observing the battle situation at all times. The 4 hallmasters and the 4,000 elite experts, who had continued for so long, finally got to release their anger and the flames of war. Naturally, they went all out. Rumble, rumble, rumble. In the next moment, boundless divine art radiance blasted on the defensive formation of Li City. There was an earth-shattering explosion that reverberated in the heaven and earth within a radius of 100,000 miles. The 4 hallmasters all thought that they could definitely destroy the defensive formation of Li City with their combined strength of 1,000 elite divine king experts. However, they did not know that before they launched the attack, after Ji Tianqing set up the 3 defensive barriers, Lai Skysplit and Yan Li mobilized the people of the Beast tribe under their command to hold the defensive formation with all their might. From that moment onwards, Li City's defensive formation was in its strongest state of defense. Even when the 4,000 god kings attacked together, even when they were attacked from 4 different directions, the 20,000 magical beasts still managed to hold on as they worked together. Amidst the deafening noises, countless techniques and spells hit the defensive formation. Dazzling lights filled the sky, and billions of shards of divine light splashed out. However, the defensive formation of Li City stood firm, and even some of the fine cracks were quickly repaired. On the other hand, the experts under the command of the 4 temple masters all revealed looks of shock and disbelief when they saw that the grand array of Li City was unscathed. Most of the desolate race's godly monarchs looked down on the lowly beast race. In their opinion, the beast race was not good at setting up formations, and it was impossible for them to set up a powerful divine formation. The defensive power of the Li City grand array had far exceeded their expectations. How could they not be shocked? Just as the 4,000 elite god kings were filled with shock, Ji Tianqing, Skysplitter, Avarice, and the many beast race citizens joined forces to launch a counterattack. That was right. Even though he was besieged by the 4 temple masters and numerous god kings, Ji Tianqing could not be passive. He had to take the initiative. As long as he had the slightest opportunity, he had to launch a counterattack. Swish, swish, swish. In an instant, the Li City's defensive formation's second barrier unleashed its full power. Although the second barrier was a defensive formation in name, it actually possessed a very strong offensive ability. As divine light flashed, the second defensive formation released a sky full of divine light blades and hundreds of millions of light arrows, shooting towards the elite experts in all directions. The sharp sound of the air being torn apart, mixed with a destructive power, poured into the crowd and illuminated a radius of tens of thousands of miles. Even though the four temple masters reacted quickly, and the 4,000 elite god kings quickly recovered from their chaotic state of mind, they immediately joined forces to cast spells to resist. However, they were not fast enough, and were still struck by the sky full of divine light and arrow rain. Rumble! Amidst the earth-shaking muffled sounds, the four temple masters and the 4,000 elite god kings were drowned by the sky full of blade light and sword rain. In the intense collision, the divine abilities and spells executed by both sides were violently colliding and collapsing, to the point of dissipating. However, amidst the dazzling light and shadow of the god kings under the four temple masters, there were still many miserable cries and muffled groans. Even if everyone joined forces to form a formation, no matter how powerful the defensive power released was, there would still be areas of negligence and mistakes. After all, the cooperation between people was far less precise than the precision of a grand formation. The first round of confrontation ended very quickly. Of the god kings under the four temple masters, more than 40 were killed on the spot. Not even their corpses remained. In addition, there were also over 100 god kings who were injured by the counterattack of the defensive formation, losing the ability to fight. These god kings who still retained their lives but lost the ability to fight also rapidly retreated to one side, hurriedly circulating their powers to heal their injuries, no longer participating in the battle. Of course, such a small number of casualties was really no big deal to the four temple masters. However, everyone's faces did not look good. Especially the head temple master, his face immediately darkened. His eyes flickered with furious killing intent. Originally, the Kongming Temple was in control of the overall situation, with victory firmly in their grasp. Who would have thought that the beast race actually still had the strength to resist? Furthermore, they even beat the Kongming Temple's god kings until their faces were covered in dirt and dust. This was simply an insult to the Kongming Temple's combat power. At this instant, the head temple master who was supervising the battle by the side flew into a rage. He sent a message to the four temple masters without hesitation. Bastard! The temple spent so many years and painstaking efforts to nurture these god king realm soldiers, but they are actually so weak that they cannot even withstand a single blow? You didn't even breach the beast race's defensive formation and already lost so many men. How can you all let this seat see any hope of victory? Two simple sentences contained the head temple master's disappointment towards the soldiers, and also expressed his fury towards the beast race's counterattack. The four temple masters were well aware that since the slaughter had already started, they absolutely could not stay behind and preserve their strength. All of their goals were to destroy Li City's defensive formation and crush the beast race as the prerequisite. Hence, the four temple masters also reprimanded the soldiers furiously, giving strict orders to the 3,000 over soldiers. No matter what, the next concentrated attack must achieve results. Want to prove that they were not trash, worthy of the Kongming Temple's many years of nurturing, they must breach the first layer of the defensive formation. The shouts and orders of the four temple masters indeed had the effect of rousing the morale of the soldiers. The 3,000 over elite god kings also received the greatest encouragement and motivation, all erupting with full power, no longer holding back or holding back. Chapter 45-54. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. A second later, the 3,000 elite god kings under the four hall masters unleashed their divine power without any regard for anything else, unleashing their most ferocious attacks. Thousands of divine technique lights once again covered the sky. Millions upon millions of saber light and sword rain, all carrying terrifying destructive power, fiercely struck the defensive formation of Li Du, kaboom. The same shattering sound rang out from all directions of the Li City's defensive array. Cracks instantly appeared on the Golden Light Grand Formation, which was thousands of miles in radius. The first barrier of Li City's defensive array was ultimately the most ordinary. How could it withstand the full power of 4,000 god kings? Following an earth-shattering explosion, the Golden Light Formation within a radius of 10,000 miles began to tremble and fall apart. Even though the beastmen were filled with worry and panic, Lai Tian and Yen Li were so angry that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They hurriedly commanded all the beastmen to repair the defensive array. But there was no time at all. Before the 20,000 beastmen could repair the defensive array, It was completely breached by the four temple masters' subordinates. Crack, crack. Amidst the sounds of shattering, the first barrier collapsed into pieces, and it transformed into a myriad of divine light fragments that collapsed and dispersed on the spot. Fortunately, when Zhou Xian was setting up the defensive array, he had calculated that the first barrier was to be sacrificed. It was not connected to his mind. Otherwise, when the first barrier was breached, he would definitely be the first to suffer a backlash and be seriously injured. Kaboom! Following a series of muffled explosions, the first defensive barrier completely collapsed and ceased to exist. The elite god kings under the four temple masters broke the first barrier in one fell swoop. They were all cheering excitedly. Their spirits were high and their spirits were high. No one understood how much pressure they were under when they attacked just now. Fortunately, they risked their lives and attacked with all their might. They successfully breached the first defensive array of Li City. If they had failed, who knew how much anger they would have to endure? At this moment, the 3,000 soldiers of the Kongming Temple were in high spirits and their morale was high. Inside Li City, the 60,000 beastmen were all in a state of panic. They were all filled with hesitation and fear. Apart from the 20,000 beastmen who had participated in the battle, the other 40,000 beastmen were all holed up in their own residences, caves and palaces. They were too weak to participate in the battle. They could only pray silently in their hearts, hoping that the beast race could survive this calamity. As for the 20,000 beasts participating in the battle, they were under the greatest pressure and were extremely tense. Before the battle began, Zhou Xian had given Lai Tian and Yan Li an order and explained the situation. Zhou Xian had made it clear from the very beginning that there were 3 layers of defensive formations and barriers in Li City. In the end, the Kongming Temple could break through all of them. However, before the 3 layers of barriers were broken, they had to buy enough time. The first defensive barrier would have to last for at least 2 hours. As for the second barrier, it would have to last for at least a day. As for the third defensive barrier, Zhou Xian had spent the most effort on it. It had to last for at least 3 days. Only then could Li City last for 4 days and wait for the beastmen under the various lords to surround and attack the Kongming Temple soldiers from the outside. At that time, the beastmen of Li City would have a chance of survival. But now, the development of the situation had exceeded everyone's expectations. The two sides had just started fighting, and in less than 10 breaths of time, the first defensive formation had been broken. The difference between 10 breaths of time and 2 hours was simply too great. One could imagine how terrified and tormented the 20,000 beastmen participating in the battle were when the first barrier collapsed. Fortunately, Zhou Xian's rallying power, Lai Tian and Yan Li's dominance were all very strong. Thanks to the past 2 months, Zhou Xian had established a strong and trustworthy image in the hearts of all the beastmen. Even when the first barrier was broken, the 20,000 beastmen did not collapse or be defeated. They still obeyed orders and held on to Zhou Xian's trust and expectations as they immediately threw themselves into the battle. Everyone's divine power immediately poured into the second defensive formation. Buzz! In an instant, the golden light barrier within a radius of 5,000 kilometers became even more dazzling, and its power increased by more than 3 times. The second defensive formation was not just purely defensive, but also began to add a large number of offensive and counterattack methods. When the 20,000 beastmen poured their divine power into it, the entire formation quickly activated, and its power also reached its peak. A ferocious aura of slaughter was immediately released from the formation, enveloping an area of 50,000 kilometers. The cheering and celebrating elites of the Kongming Temple immediately fell silent when they sensed the overwhelming killing intent. The suffocating aura of slaughter made all the elite godly kings understand that their all-out attack was only beginning to bear fruit. They had only broken through the first defensive formation. According to the first Hallmaster's orders, Li City currently had 3 layers of barriers, and each layer was more powerful than the last. They had only broken through the first layer, which was the weakest defensive formation. It was not worth cheering or celebrating. They were still far from victory, far from breaching Li City. After calming down, the 3,000 elite godly kings obeyed the orders of the 4 Hallmasters and once again attacked with all their might. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Whoosh 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 whoosh. In the next instant, tens of thousands of divine art lights, carrying the power to destroy everything, crashed into Li City's defensive formation. Bam bam bam. Rumble. Amidst the deafening explosions, the destructive divine art brilliance caused the second defensive formation to tremble, and the divine light exploded. Although the second defensive formation did not shatter and there were no cracks. But the 3,000 godly kings of the Kongming Temple had sufficient knowledge and judgment. They could all see that Li City's second defensive formation was not as strong and indestructible as they had imagined. As long as they could shake it, they had absolute confidence in defeating it. Continue to charge. Don't stop, Li City's defensive formation will not last more than a few times. This time, without the 4 Hallmasters' orders, the 3,000 godly kings spontaneously shouted to boost each other's morale. Without the 4 Hallmasters' orders, the 3,000 elite godly kings immediately launched a second round of attacks. Boom boom boom. Divine art lights once again blotted out the sky, and saber lights and sword shadows that blotted out the sun fell, smashing into the flickering golden formation. With another boom, the second defensive formation still shook violently, rippling as if it could not bear the burden. And in reality, the golden formation that spanned 10,000 miles still did not show any cracks. Seeing this scene, the elite godly kings of the Kongming Temple were shocked, and their unwillingness to lose was aroused. As for the 4 Hallmasters and the first Hallmaster, they all frowned, their faces turning grim. Chapter 45-55. I didn't expect that the divine array set up by that young god emperor would be so powerful. Looks like we underestimated that guy's strength. What are you afraid of? So what if the defensive array he set up is powerful? We will definitely be able to break it. Give me a little more time, I will definitely be able to find the flaw in his array. Not just the few Hallmasters, the various God King experts under the Kongming Temple also started discussing. While everyone was still in shock, they were racking their brains to think of a way to break Ji Tianxing's defensive formation. Even though the Kongming Temple experts all knew that there was nothing special about the defensive array set up by Ji Tianxing, nor was it that profound or exquisite. But the strange thing was that such a basic and ordinary array could produce an extraordinary effect when combined together. Even if the 4 Hallmasters focused on studying for an hour, they could not come up with a way to break it. During this hour, more than 3,000 elite powerhouses of the Temple of Emptiness had been working together to cast spells and attack. However, no matter how powerful the divine abilities released by everyone were, they were unable to shake the second layer of the defensive array. Tens of thousands of divine technique light rays fiercely bombarded the golden light barrier, but could only cause it to sway left and right. Even at the most critical moment, fine cracks appeared on the golden light barrier within a radius of 10,000 miles, but it still did not shatter. The attack that lasted for an hour made the 3,000 God King experts of the Kongming Temple feel slack and powerless. Without the 4 Hallmasters' orders, many God King experts were powerless and slowed down the speed of their attacks. And at this time the head Hallmaster's anger poured down. He sent a message to the 4 Hallmasters, asking why they could not come up with a solution after studying and probing for an hour. What should they do to break the defensive array set up by Ji Tianxing? What method should they use? What divine abilities should they use to break Ji Tianxing's array? Unfortunately, no matter how hard the 4 Palace Masters thought about it, they still could not get what they wanted. They had no choice but to admit that even though their cultivation realms were higher than Ji Tianxing's, their attainments in the array Dao were still inferior. Even though the first Palace Master was furious and reprimanded the 4 Palace Masters, it was useless. In the end, the first Palace Master had to personally take action to find and explore the method to break the formation. This gave the beastmen in Li City a chance to catch their breaths. The reason why the second barrier was so resilient and unbreakable was largely due to the 20,000 beastmen. If they hadn't given it their all and poured in their divine power to strengthen the formation, it wouldn't have been able to hold on for so long. However, after the Kongming Temple slowed down their attacks, the 20,000 beasts took turns to rest and recuperate. At the same time, Lai Tian and Yanli began to speak to encourage their people. Skysplitter and Loathing gave high praise and recognition to the spirit of dedication and unity of the beastmen. The two of them also reminded and encouraged him about the pressure and problems he would face next. As a result, not only did the 20,000 beastmen not feel tired or fearful, they became even more spirited and their morale soared. This result surprised Skysplitter and Yanli. They didn't dare to believe it. Why were their people still so excited when they had already explained the difficulties and challenges they were about to face? They didn't understand, so they went to ask Ji Tianxing. After all, this move was taught to them by Ji Tianxing. Before this battle, they would never do something like this. In the minds of the beastmen, it was either fight or die. There was no such thing as flowery words. However, it was Ji Tianxing's instructions and teachings that made them realize that this was the true medical skill of language. In just a few sentences, the same thing could be said in a different way, and it had an unexpected effect. At this moment, Sky Splitter and Yanli were very impressed by Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing's answer to them was, being open and honest with their people and fighting side by side with them was the best strategy. Compared to intimidation and coercion, this was always the best way to win people's hearts. Sky Splitter and Yanli deeply agreed. Of course, they had already lived for tens of thousands of years and gathered countless beastmen under their command. It was impossible for them not to understand this principle. However, in these tens of thousands of years, the beastmen had never suffered a great calamity. Sky Splitter and Yanli had also never tried this method. They understood the principle behind it, but they had never put it into practice. However, Ji Tianxing's words made them realize that in the future, when they led the beastmen under their command, they had to use both strength and gentleness. They couldn't be like before, using iron and blood methods and discipline to suppress all their people. Although this method was very effective, it definitely wasn't the best method. It couldn't allow their people to unleash their strongest combat strength. Within Li City, Ji Tianxing, Sky Splitter, and Yanli were still discussing how to deal with the situation. The 20,000 beastmen were still taking turns to rest. At this moment, the 4 Hall Masters and over 3,000 Divine King experts were also slowing down their attacks and taking turns to rest. No Divine King expert could endure a long period of high-intensity attacks. After all, they weren't God Emperor. They couldn't reach the realm where their divine power circulated endlessly and would never tire. Many Divine King experts stopped fighting in an orderly manner. They took out divine pills and consumed them, circulating their techniques to recover their divine power. At the same time, the head Hall Master was using a divine ability and secret technique with a solemn expression. He carefully observed Li City's second barrier, looking for a way to break it. Obviously, whether or not the Temple of Kongming would be able to break through the Li capital, the key point would be him. This made him very pressured. Of course, it also made the 4 Hall Masters and over 3,000 Divine King experts feel even more pressured. The entire Kongming Temple's elite forces were gathered here, but no one could break through Li City's second defensive barrier. In the end, they still needed the head Hall Master's help. What did this mean? It only meant that the Kongming Temple experts were useless. That's right. When the head Hall Master reprimanded the 4 Hall Masters, he used this word. However, when the problem finally fell on the head Hall Master, the 4 Hall Masters and over 3,000 Divine King experts were relieved. Because the head Hall Master had to solve this problem to prove that everyone was useless, and he was qualified for the position of head Hall Master. If even he couldn't solve it, didn't that mean he was useless too? At that time, with so many elites of Kongming Temple, how would they break through Li City? Sweat. Drop after drop of sweat seeped out from the head Hall Master's forehead. However, he quickly used his divine power to wipe it away. His eyes flickered with a crimson light. He stared at Li City's defensive array intently, observing and studying it with incomparable seriousness. This array, with a circumference of 10,000 miles, was formed by dozens of array formations pieced together, but it also contained thousands of variations. Although the method of setting up the array was the most common among Emperor-level divine arrays. However, the thought process of setting up the array was too active, and there were too many variations. The head Hall Master had to understand everything before he could consider the method of breaking the array. Chapter 45-56. Time passed quietly. The Kongming Temple's attacks also slowed down. Even though the sky was filled with divine skill light, it did not hurt or itch the defensive array. Both sides were consciously recuperating and recovering their divine power. After all, everyone knew that this battle was a protracted one and could not be resolved in a day. The soldiers on both sides could still maintain a peaceful state of mind. They only needed to rest, recover their divine power, and participate in the battle. However, the commanders on both sides were burning with anxiety. Lai Tian and Yanli had already followed Ji Tianxing's instructions and used a secret technique to issue a summons to the people under the lords. At least tens of millions of beasts had received the summons. Among them, hundreds of thousands of elite beasts with formidable battle prowess had been selected and were rushing over to reinforce Li City. However, the territories of the lords were a certain distance away from each other. They could not rush over quickly. The battle situation was so tense that the 800,000 Beast Clan people had to rush over as quickly as possible. Therefore Lai Tian and Yan Li were very anxious. On average, they would send messages to the soldiers every 4 hours, urging them to reinforce Li City as soon as possible. Only Ji Tianxing was as calm as ever, remaining calm and collected. After all, the second barrier could last for a while. He still had many trump cards that he had not used. No matter how panicked Lai Tian and Yan Li were, all changes were within his calculations. Even if there were heavy casualties in the end, he had enough confidence to ensure his own safety. Even if he could not win, he could escape safely and think of a countermeasure. On the other side, the 4 palace masters and the head palace master were also in a state of anxiety. Especially the head palace master, who had observed the second barrier of Li City more than 20 times in 10 hours. It could be confirmed that he had grasped all the details and did not miss any key points. However, he spent a few more hours to repeatedly deduce and test the defensive array and came up with more than 10 solutions. But in the end, he still could not find the best solution. This made him feel extremely ashamed and embarrassed. Even if the 4 palace masters and soldiers did not dare to laugh at him, he still felt very angry and ashamed. Damn it! That kid is only at the God Emperor initial stage. His skills and strength in setting up the divine array are only at the God Emperor initial stage. Why am I, a dignified upper stage God Emperor, unable to break his array formation? Where did he learn so many bizarre and unheard of methods of setting up formations? The first palace master roared and cursed in his heart, feeling very confused. From his point of view, Ji Tianxing seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. Not only was its origin mysterious, even the method of setting up the formation was extremely foreign and unprecedented. It was as if this guy was not from the planet of origin at all. Half a day later, the first palace master ran out of ideas. He had to admit that he couldn't think of a perfect way to break the formation in such a short amount of time. He could only silently admit defeat and give the order with a gloomy face. It will be difficult to break the formation in a short period of time. Our opponent is very strong and cannot be underestimated. And we can't delay any longer. We have to break through the barrier of Li City in one go and exterminate the beasts as soon as possible. I order all members of the Kongming Temple to go all out and attack at all costs. They must break through the defensive barrier. I will participate in the battle and take action personally. Those who slack off will be beheaded without mercy. After a short few breaths, the first palace master's order was passed down to the 4 palace masters and more than 3,000 divine king powerhouses. After everyone heard the order, their first reaction was shock. By God! The first palace master actually admitted that he failed? How can this be? There's still an array formation that the first palace master can't break in this world? The first palace master studied for a full 12 hours. I didn't expect that he still couldn't find a way to break the formation. That young God Emperor's array Dao attainments are high to what extent? Too despicable. That guy is too cunning. If he has the ability, remove the grand array and fight it out with real swords and spears. Only the weak and incompetent will rely on the protection and blessings of the array formation. If he dares to remove the defensive grand array, we'll definitely flatten Li City and exterminate all living things. More than 3,000 divine king powerhouses discussed animatedly in private. Even the 4 palace masters felt that it was unexpected and were rather shocked in their hearts. Even before this, they already knew that Ji Tianxing's strength was very powerful and was not to be trifled with. But they did not expect that Ji Tianxing's array Dao attainments were already powerful to such an extent, making even the first palace master feel troubled. Under the circumstances where there was no other way, the 4 palace masters and the 3,000 over divine king powerhouses could only give up all of their fantasies. Since they could not break the formation, then they could only attack with all their might and forcefully breach Li City's second barrier. Hence, the Kongming Temple's 4-pronged great army launched a new round of attacks again. This time, the 3,000 over elite divine kings already recovered more than half of their divine power after recuperating and adjusting their breathing. When they gave up all of their fantasies and attacked with all their might, the divine abilities and consummate skills released, the power far surpassed before. The divine art light that blotted out the sky was even more dazzling and eye-catching than before. The ear-splitting loud noise was even more frenzied than before, shaking heaven and earth. And the power of the four-pronged great army joining hands also far surpassed before, even more apocalyptic. All of a sudden the beastmen of Li City felt an immense pressure. The golden light barrier in a radius of 10,000 miles also started shaking violently, bursting with cracks. Rumble. Bang. 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 Boom. Crack. Amidst the series of loud noises, the golden light barrier tottered on the verge of collapse. Countless divine light fragments exploded, splattering in all directions, covering the sky in a radius of 50,000 miles. The situation was critical. The 20,000 beast race citizens all clenched their teeth tightly, casting spells without regard for anything, maintaining the defensive grand array. Skysplit and Loathing also learned the method of boosting morale, casting spells to maintain the grand array while encouraging the beast race citizens, bolstering their courage and cheering them on. Ji Tianxing's expression also became solemn, sitting cross-legged in the sky above Li City, both hands constantly forming divine seals to cast spells, rapidly repairing the cracks in the defensive barrier. Both sides' battle entered a stalemate state once again. Even though neither side sacrificed a single person, the point of contention was in the details. Every crack and loophole in the defensive grand array determined the outcome of the battle. Time still flowed by mercilessly. 12 hours, 24 hours, 38 hours. Unknowingly 24 hours passed. A full 2 days' time. Li City's second defensive barrier actually lasted for a full 2 days. Until the morning of the third day, the golden light barrier in a radius of 10,000 miles was finally breached by the Kongming Temple's army. This result was not expected by anyone. Not only the Kongming Temple's experts, even the beast race citizens Skysplit and Loathing were very surprised. The first to be breached was the south of Li City. Because the Lord Hallmaster had driven the battleship to the south of Li City and personally cast spells to attack. Chapter 45-57. Rumble. Hey. A series of muffled sounds exploded, reverberating endlessly between heaven and earth. With a crisp cracking sound, the second defensive barrier that enveloped Li City was finally breached by the Temple of Kongming. The first palace lord gripped the divine scepter and stood proudly in the sky, his robes and hair dancing in the wind. He exuded a powerful and dignified aura. In the sky in front of him, millions of shards of divine light flew through the air. Berserk shockwaves, wrapped in countless shards of divine light, transformed into a flood of multicolored light that blotted out the heavens. This scene made the first palace master's figure seem even more majestic. Not far behind him, the 1,000 elite god kings of the Kongming Temple were cheering in excitement, cheering for the first palace lord's heroism. After 2 days of continuous high-intensity spellcasting and attacks, all the soldiers were exhausted. Fortunately, the first palace lord had personally used an emperor-level divine artifact to break through the second barrier of Li Capital. Otherwise, the 4 palace lords and the 3,000 soldiers would have had to attack for another 2 days before they could break through. From this moment on, the mentality of the Kongming Temple soldiers had changed. In the past they were proud, believing that the Kongming Temple was so powerful that they had the right to look down on everything. The palace masters had gathered 4,000 elites to chase after a young divine monarch of the flood race. Many people were cursing in their hearts, thinking that they were making a mountain out of a molehill. But now no one dared to think such a thing. Everyone realized that the enemy of the Kongming Divine Palace was too powerful. It was beyond their expectations. No one dared to dream that they could easily deal with the young flood god emperor and all the beast race in Li Capital. They only hoped that the palace lords were strong enough to end this war as quickly as possible. Moreover, they could minimize the casualties of the soldiers as much as possible. After a long while, the heaven-shaking explosions gradually faded away, and the shards of divine light also disappeared. Everyone's eyes were focused on the palace lords. The soldiers gasped for breath as they waited for the next order from the palace masters. The Grand Palace Master wanted to continue casting spells and lead all the elite deity kings to attack, breaking through the third defensive formation in one go. But on second thought, the second defensive formation was already so brilliant that it took the Kongming Temple 2 days to break through. It could be imagined that the third defensive formation of Li City would be even more powerful. It would take more than 3 to 5 days for them to break through it. Looking at the soldiers of the Kongming Temple, which one of them wasn't exhausted, panting and pale? Only a few palace masters were able to preserve their strength and were calm and composed. Those elite godly kings were all lacking in godly power, and their strength had declined greatly. In their current state, even if they pulled themselves together and attacked with all their might, they might not be able to do much. Thus, the head hallmaster could only wave his hand and give the order. Everyone, continue to cast your spells and attack with all your might. Now that Li City's second defensive formation has been broken, victory is already in sight, and we will soon be able to kill our way into Li City. But everyone must guard against arrogance and rashness. You must not be reckless. From now on, everyone will rest and recuperate for 3 days. After 3 days, you will continue to act according to orders and strive to break through Li City in one go. The vigorous voice reverberated in the sky, and the thousands of elite godly kings heard it clearly, and immediately revealed an expression of relief. Just now, everyone was still worried that if the head hallmaster gave the order for everyone to continue attacking, then they would suffer. Fortunately, the head hallmaster was not blinded by victory, and could still maintain his calm and control the situation. 3 days of rest, although it sounded very short, was enough for everyone to recover most of their godly power. Thus, after all the soldiers said yes in unison, they all rested where they were. The battlefield quickly quieted down and everyone took the godly pills in an orderly manner, circulating their godly power to recover. The head hallmaster also left quietly, rushing to the east of Li City. Of course, he had already used his divine thought to inform the other 3 palace masters, and gave them the order. Within Li City, the heavens and earth within a radius of 10,000 miles were shrouded in a heavy and oppressive atmosphere. Although the 50,000 Beast Clan citizens had long been mentally prepared, and knew that the second defensive formation of Li City would be broken through sooner or later. In fact, even the third defensive formation might not be able to withstand the attack of the Kongming Temple, and it was very likely that it would be broken through. At that time, the 50,000 Beast Clan citizens would have to bear the brunt of the weapons, and most of them would not be able to escape and would definitely die here. However, when the second defensive formation was broken through and collapsed, all the Beast Clan citizens' hearts trembled, and they secretly clenched their fists. Even if they were mentally prepared when the moment truly arrived, they would still be nervous, worried, anxious, and even fearful. The second defensive formation was broken through, which meant that there was only one last barrier left in Li City. Even if they were very confident in the third barrier, and knew that its defensive power was very strong, they also knew that this barrier would definitely be broken through. The only question was how long it would take to break through the Kongming Temple. Many Beast Clan citizens secretly calculated that it might be 3 days. There were also a small number of Beast Clan citizens who had fantasies and expectations about the third formation, and felt that it would take at least 5 days to break through. As for Lai Tian and Yen Li, they announced to the vast number of Beast Clan citizens that it would take at least 10 days for the Kongming Temple to break through. Even if the 2 of them said so repeatedly, they vowed solemnly. However, the Beast Clan citizens did not believe them at all, and only felt that they were deliberately exaggerating in order to boost morale. Lai Tian and Yen Li wasted a lot of time talking before they helplessly discovered that the encouragement method they had just learned suddenly lost its effectiveness. There was really no other way, and the 2 of them were burning with worry. Lai Tian hurriedly went to find Ji Tianxing to ask for a countermeasure. Ji Tianxing was still sitting cross-legged in the center of Li City, and his eyes were closed as he silently meditated. It looked like he was not doing anything and was only recuperating and adjusting his breathing. However, in reality, his consciousness had merged with the third defensive formation, and he was modifying and adjusting the formation. Not only did he have to repair the flaws in the formation, making it more perfect, but he also had to change the structure of the formation. It was very necessary to do so. This was because previously the Lord Hallmaster's divine consciousness had penetrated the 3 defensive formations, and carefully examined the structure of the third formation. Next, when the Kongming Temple launched another attack, the Lord Hallmaster would be able to quickly identify the weak points of the formation, and then concentrate his strength to attack. Ji Tianxing had to modify the formation so that the Lord Hallmaster would not know where to start. The more than 3,000 godly kings of the Kongming Temple would also have to spend a lot of time to do so. When his modification work was nearing its end, Lai Tian rushed over with a worried expression and landed in front of him. Chapter 45-58. Long Tian. The situation is not good. Lai Tian said with a solemn expression. He was worried sick at heart. Ji Tianxing was still sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. His expression was calm and he did not respond. Seeing this, Lai Tian understood that Long Tian was working on something and should not be disturbed. Therefore he did not say anything and waited quietly. He thought to himself that if Long Tian did not respond in 15 minutes, he would turn around and leave. After all, the current situation was too tricky and no one could do anything about it. Fortunately, after a short 100 breaths, Ji Tianxing finished channeling the technique and opened his eyes. He looked at Lai Tian calmly and knew what Lai Tian was worried about. What's the hurry? Wasn't it to be expected that the second defensive formation would be breached? Moreover, it took the godly temple of Kongming 2 days to break through, which is already beyond our expectations. Compared to the original plan, we have gained 1 more day. Ji Tianxing said. His voice was steady and powerful and his breath was calm and peaceful. Lai Tian was originally worried and anxious, but when he heard his voice, he felt relieved and calmed down. That's right, I know what you said. Lai Tian nodded and smiled bitterly. He spread out his hands and said, but the problem now is that after the second defensive array was broken, all the people are very depressed and worried. Especially the 20,000 people who participated in the battle. They have used up too much divine power and are very tired and weak. Now that their morale is low, I can't help but worry if they can stop the Kongming Temple's next attack. It was obvious that not only were the people of the Beast clan panicking and worried, even Lai Tian was not confident and anxious. Ji Tianxing did not respond to Lai Tian's words but asked, how long will it take for the reinforcements to reach Li City? Lai Tian thought for a while and answered, those who are closer will need 3 days. Most of them will need 10 days and the furthest will need a month. However, there are 3 reinforcements that are closest to us and will probably arrive tomorrow. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and ordered, when the 3 reinforcements arrive, tell them to stay 400,000 li away and wait for orders. Do not act rashly. Lai Tian was a little stunned. He asked, shouldn't they take the opportunity to ambush the Kongming Temple's army? Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, even if the number of reinforcements is as many as 30,000, their overall strength is too low. Rashly attacking will only expose our whereabouts and our plan. It won't be of much use. Moreover, after the Kongming Temple broke through the second defensive formation, it had used up too much energy and was currently in a state of emptiness. Currently, the 4 armies of the Kongming Temple had stopped fighting and were resting. According to my estimation, they will need to rest for at least 3 days before they can regain their combat strength. Ah, really? Lai Tian was stunned for a moment. He felt very surprised and couldn't help but reveal a pleasantly surprised expression. If that's really the case, that's great. The anxiety in his heart immediately dissipated by more than half. His thoughts became active again. He hurriedly asked, no wonder the Kongming Temple didn't react after the second formation was broken. Since we can delay for 3 more days, our chances of winning are higher. Long Tian, we should take advantage of these 3 days to set up 2 more divine formations. This way we can delay for even more time. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and explained, the people of the Kongming Temple need to rest for 3 days. Don't the 20,000 people of the Beast clan who participated in the battle need to rest and adjust their breathing? They're also very weak. When the formation was broken, there were even thousands of people who suffered from the backlash and were seriously injured. Lai Tian frowned and asked, I know this too. What should we do? Don't tell me we don't set up the formation anymore? Ji Tianxing answered, just in case we still have to set up the formation. However, I will join forces with the divine kings under my command. You and Yanli will cooperate. The other people of the Beast clan will take turns to rest in an orderly manner. You must remain vigilant. In addition, inform the reinforcements that no matter which reinforcements arrive, they must stay 400,000 miles away and wait for orders. No matter how critical the situation is, as long as Li Du hasn't fallen, they cannot act rashly. Lai Tian nodded repeatedly to express his agreement with the first few sentences. But the last 2 sentences made Lai Tian frown. He was very puzzled. Do we have to wait until Li Du is broken before letting the reinforcements take action? If that's the case, what's the use of us summoning them? Originally, the reinforcements came to help to protect Li Du. If the reinforcements took action after Li Du was broken, there wouldn't be much meaning in it. Ji Tianxing was too lazy to explain too much. He only responded with one sentence. The reinforcements are our trump card. They must be used at the most critical moment. Only then can we kill them in one blow. Lai Tian thought for a while and roughly understood what he meant and guessed his plan. He completely calmed down and became more confident and expectant. After bidding farewell to Ji Tianxing, Lai Tian turned to leave. He comforted the people of the Beast clan and arranged for them to take turns to rest in an orderly manner. Ji Tianxing also started to get busy. He took out the god-slaying battleship and summoned many of his friends and family. Ji Tianxing had already explained to everyone about the war between the Beast clan, Li Du, and the Kongming Temple. So when everyone appeared, Ji Tianxing didn't have to explain much. They knew what to do. Ji Tianxing selected 300 God King experts and gave each of them 3 Emperor-level divine weapons. He also arranged for everyone to stand. After that, Ji Tianxing took charge of the situation and started to cast spells to set up the Emperor-level divine formation. The 300 God King experts led by Yun Yao and Ji Ku also activated their divine power in an orderly manner. They cooperated with Ji Tianxing to set up the formation. Originally, the tens of thousands of people of the Beast clan were gloomy and filled with worry and fear. Seeing Ji Tianxing leading a large group of God King experts to set up the divine formation in the sky, the people of the Beast clan felt much more at ease. At this moment, Lai Tian gave another series of orders and arranged the tasks in an orderly manner. The people of the Beast clan gradually calmed down and their panic gradually dissipated. 2 hours later, all the tasks were arranged and everything was carried out in an orderly manner. After Lai Tian and Yan Li were done with their work, they met up again. Yan Li's expression was a little strange. She looked like she wanted to say something but stopped. Lai Tian saw the clue and asked, "Yan Li, what's wrong? Do you have something to say to me? Or did something happen?" Yan Li hesitated and looked at Ji Tianxing, who was busy setting up the formation in the sky. She transmitted her voice to Lai Tian and said, "Lai Tian, don't you feel that something is strange? Li Du is our territory and the entire Beast clan is our people. That Long Tian was originally our slave and had to submit to us and work for us. But now he seems to have become the master of Li Du and is in control of the situation. Even you and I have to listen to his orders." Chapter 45-59. Lai Tian was stunned by Yan Li's words. He had to admit that it was the truth. If it wasn't for Yan Li's reminder, he wouldn't have even realized it. At this moment, both of them were silent, carefully recalling what had happened before, trying to find the turning point of the relationship between the two sides. However, even after thinking for a while, the two of them still could not remember when Long Tian had taken the initiative and become the host. Since they couldn't figure it out, Lai Tian simply stopped thinking about it. It's useless to think about it now. Anyway, we've already adapted and tacitly agreed. Li City is already in such a situation. If you and I were in control of the overall situation, it would be impossible to achieve this. The 50,000 people would have been slaughtered long ago. Lai Tian looked around the entire Li City and transmitted his voice to Yan Li. Even if he's more like the master of Li City than us, even you and I listen to his orders, that's because he's really qualified. I know what you're worried about, but I think you can completely dispel it. A guy who gave the 5 temple masters of Kongming Temple such a headache. Of course he's qualified to take charge of the overall situation for us. Moreover, I believe that with his strength and vision, when our agreement is up, he'll definitely leave. What you're worried about won't happen." Yan Li frowned and thought for a long time. He could only sigh and say, "Alas. I hope I'm measuring the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain." Lai Tian patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Although I'm not as good as you in some aspects, I believe I'm not bad at judging people. The situation is already like this, we should believe in him." Yan Li nodded and didn't say anything more. Time passed very quickly. A day later, there were 3 beastmen who were closer to Li City than the rest of the beastmen. These 3 reinforcements had about 30,000 people, and their strength was between the 8th level of the Divine Monarch realm and the 5th level of the Divine King realm. Most of them were upper Divine Monarchs and peak Divine Monarchs. Only 30% of them were lower Divine Kings and a small number of middle Divine Kings. They were worried about Li City's safety and rushed over with murderous intent. However, they didn't directly rush to Li City to attack the Kongming Temple's army. They had no choice. Before arriving at Li City, they received orders from Lai Tian and Yan Li. Therefore, the three reinforcements hid 400,000 kilometers away and waited patiently. 2 days later, among the 4 armies of Kongming Temple, a few God King experts gradually recovered their divine energy. At the same time, some of the beasts in Li City were gradually recovering their divine power. Ji Tianxing and the 300 God King powerhouses under his command continued casting for 2 days and successfully set up the 4th defensive array. Finally, the 3-day deadline was up. The beastmen in Li City were still taking turns to recuperate, seizing every second to recover their strength. The 4 armies of the Kongming Temple received the order at the same time and stopped circulating their martial arts to regulate their breathing. More than 3,000 elite Divine King powerhouses quickly assembled and silently arranged themselves into a battle formation. Even though only 20% of the God King's power had returned to normal, and only more than half of the remaining 80% had returned. But no one complained and no one dared to stall for time. The reason why these Divine King powerhouses were called the elites of Kongming Temple was not only because of their strength, but also because of their high level of discipline. Not long after, following the orders of the 4 temple masters, the 3,000 elite Divine Kings unleashed their powers at the same time. Through the battle formation, they released destructive attacks that fiercely bombarded the 3rd defensive array. Rumble. Bam bam bam. The light of divine techniques that blotted out the sky carried the power to destroy everything as they continuously bombarded the golden light barrier, causing earth-shattering explosions. The golden light barrier, which was thousands of kilometers in radius, trembled violently from the bombardment and flashed with dazzling golden light. The ruins tens of thousands of kilometers around Li City were torn apart by the bombardment. Dust flew everywhere, covering the sky and the sun. The sudden attack caused the earth to shake and the mountains to shake. In an instant, more than 50,000 people in Li City were awakened. The 30,000 beastmen who did not participate in the battle suddenly felt their hearts tighten, and their expressions became serious. They knew that the 3-day rest period was over, and the Kongming Temple was about to launch another attack. Many people looked up at the golden light barrier and observed it without blinking. They prayed in their hearts that nothing would happen to the barrier. Of the 20,000 beastmen who participated in the battle, more than 1,000 were severely injured and could not recover in a short period of time. They had already been replaced. At this moment, 10,000 participants were circulating their energy and recuperating, while the other 10,000 remained vigilant, ready to fight at any moment. When the golden light barrier began to shake, a deafening explosion sounded. The moment the battle began, the 10,000 participants did not even need the orders of the temple masters to attack. Out of instinct, they released their violent divine power and injected it into the defensive array, increasing the array's power. The golden light barrier only shook a dozen times before quickly stabilizing. The dazzling golden light that flashed chaotically also quickly extinguished, returning to calm and stability. No matter how the 4 armies of the Kongming Temple attacked with all their might and used all kinds of divine techniques, they could not shake the golden light barrier. A full 100 breaths of time passed, and the Kongming Temple's continuous attacks did not achieve any results. Seeing that the golden light barrier was still as strong as before, the worried beastmen finally calmed down. Of course, to be safe, the 10,000 beastmen who were circulating their energy and recuperating also ended their cultivation and joined the battle. The situation was back to normal. The 20,000 beastmen cast their spells at the same time to maintain the 3rd defensive array, increasing its power by several times. The golden light barrier became stronger and stronger, and the 4 armies of the Kongming Temple found it more and more difficult. Under the guidance of Lai Tian and Yan Li, the beastmen could even control the array and launch a counterattack against the Kongming Temple's army. The 2 sides fought back and forth fiercely. The beastmen were safe, but the Kongming Temple's main hall began to suffer casualties, and their numbers slowly decreased. This affected the morale of the Kongming Temple to a certain extent, especially those divine kings who had not recovered their divine power. They deeply felt powerless and were secretly worried. Helpless, the 4 temple masters could only use all kinds of inspiring slogans to boost the morale of the soldiers. Furthermore, through clever words, they made the 3,000 soldiers realize that this battle would not end in a short period of time. The enemy's strength was very strong and could not be underestimated. If they wanted to break the third defensive array and completely destroy the last line of defensively city, they would need at least 5 to 6 days. After the temple master's explanation and persuasion, the 3,000 soldiers finally calmed down. With sufficient mental preparation, they were no longer anxious. They followed orders and fought steadily step by step. Just like that, the two sides entered a stalemate. As time passed, the number of elite divine kings of the Kongming Temple decreased at the rate of 3 to 5 deaths every 2 hours. Chapter 45-60. A day passed. Both sides were still in a stalemate and it was hard to tell who would win. The process of the battle was very dry and boring, and there was nothing praiseworthy about it. After all, the 3,000 over soldiers of Kongming Temple and the 20,000 Beast Clan citizens were fighting through the defensive array. Before the array was breached, only the soldiers of Kongming Temple were at a disadvantage. The 4 hall masters had to summarize the results of the first day's battle and report to the first hall master. The main content of the report was the number of soldiers under each hall master's command that had been sacrificed. 32 soldiers under the 5th hall master were sacrificed on the first day, and 15 were seriously injured. 26 elite divine kings under the 4th hall master were killed in battle, and 18 were seriously injured and lost the ability to fight. Under the 3rd hall master, the divine kings under the 2nd palace master. In the end, the conclusion was that 120 elite divine kings were sacrificed on the first day, and 90 were seriously injured and lost the ability to fight. In addition, there was a small problem with the 4th hall master's warship, and it needed to stop the battle for a day before it could be repaired. The 4 hall masters thought that the 1st hall master would fly into a rage after receiving the battle report, and he would be very disappointed in everyone. After all, the 4 armies had not breached the defensive array, and they had not started a direct battle with the Beast Clan, and there were already such casualties. This was too shocking. But to everyone's surprise, the 1st hall master was calm after reading the battle report, and he did not have much of a reaction. It was as if the number of casualties was within his expectations, and he did not find it strange. Most importantly, more than 100 people had been sacrificed on the first day, and there were still a few days left. By the time the defensive array was breached, wouldn't they have to sacrifice 700 to 800 elite divine kings? How could the 1st hall master not be moved by such heavy losses? The 4 hall masters were puzzled, but they did not dare to ask. They could only try to figure it out secretly. Not long after, the hall masters finally understood. They all recalled what the 1st hall master had said when he had decided to go all out to kill Ji Tianxing. As long as they could capture the young Hong tribe god emperor, they would not hesitate to sacrifice all the elite divine kings under the Kongming Temple. When the 4 palace masters heard this, they only thought that it was an exaggeration and that the 1st palace master only wanted to express his determination. Unexpectedly, the 1st palace master really thought so. The first day ended and the second day arrived. The dull and boring battle did not stop for even a moment. It was still ongoing. Rumble. The earth-shattering sound of explosions reverberated between heaven and earth. Endless shards of divine light mixed with the violent shockwaves, forming a colorful storm of divine light that spread out in all directions, engulfing the heavens and the earth. The land within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles had long been reduced to ruins. It had been repeatedly scoured and bombarded, layer after layer flattened. 24 hours had finally passed. At the end of the second day, the 4 hall masters once again counted the casualties of their subordinates and reported it to the head hall master. Today, the 4 palace masters had slightly adjusted their battle plan. They knew that this was going to be a protracted battle, so they couldn't sacrifice their soldiers like they did yesterday. They had to control the number of casualties. Reality proved that the adjustments made by the 4 palace masters were effective. Only 80 elite divine kings had died in today's battle, and only 50 or so had been seriously injured and lost the ability to fight. After the 4 palace masters reported the battle situation, they thought that the head hall master would feel gratified. Even if there were no substantial rewards, he would still praise them verbally. But in reality, the head hall master did not have any reaction after reading the battle report. This made the 4 palace masters understand that the head hall master did not care about the casualties of his subordinates, nor did he care about the process. He only needed results. The four palace masters understood the head hall master's intentions and continued to participate in the battle. They attacked in an orderly and planned manner. As for the interior of Li City, the atmosphere gradually returned to calmness and stability. The four armies of the Kongming Temple attacked continuously for 2 days, but they were still unable to break through the defensive formation. They did not even leave a gap or crack. This filled the tens of thousands of beasts with confidence. They firmly believed that the formation could hold on for another 10 days. Even if the third defensive formation was broken after 10 days, they still had a fourth defensive formation. In short, they would definitely be able to stall for time until reinforcements arrived. The Kongming Temple needed to report the battle results every day, but the beasts who participated in the battle did not need to. Anyway, they had the protection of the defensive formation, so there were no casualties. It was just that everyone's divine power was depleted very quickly, so they could not all participate in the battle at once. Under the arrangement of Lai Tian and Yen Li, they took turns to participate in the battle and were able to get a certain amount of rest. Ji Tianxing did not participate in the battle. As long as the head hall master did not participate in the battle, even if the four palace masters joined forces, Lai Tian and Yen Li were enough to control the formation. Ji Tianxing would only participate when the head hall master personally participated. Most importantly, he had used too much divine power to set up the defensive formations previously. He needed to replenish it as soon as possible. In order to recover his divine power as soon as possible, he returned to the distorted spacetime of the divine pagoda and did not hesitate to consume large amounts of divine pills and elixirs, as well as a sea of cultivation resources. The third day ended. The death toll of the Kongming Temple was reduced to 50, and the seriously injured was reduced to 40. The fourth day, the fifth day, the sixth day, the number of casualties was gradually decreasing every day. This proved that the strategy of the four palace masters was correct. However, the power of the four armies' attacks was also gradually weakening, and they were still unable to shake the third defensive formation. More than 3,000 elite divine kings all felt extremely exhausted, and their strength was also greatly reduced. The continuous decline in morale made the four palace masters anxious, and they could only ask the head hall master for instructions. After such a long period of recuperation, the head hall master's strength had recovered to its peak state, and he finally decided to take action. On the morning of the seventh day, he took out his emperor-level divine weapon, waved his sacred scepter, and used his most powerful killing move. His left hand formed a divine art, and his right hand waved the scepter, releasing extremely violent divine power that connected the heaven and earth within a radius of 1,000,000 miles. Endless divine power of heaven and earth gathered from all directions, and under his guidance and control, it condensed into a giant sword that could split the heaven and earth apart. Within a radius of more than 100,000 miles, the 3,000 soldiers of the Kongming Temple all saw the wind and clouds surging and sand and rocks flying. Moreover, several giant swords that were tens of thousands of feet long appeared high in the sky. The divine power of heaven and earth was condensed to the extreme, and the 6 giant swords that could split the heaven and earth also condensed into a solid form. At this time, the head hall master used 2 more strands of Daoist rhyme, and drew the power of the heavenly Tao into the 6 giant swords. In an instant, the 6 giant swords became resplendent with golden light, sacred and incomparably powerful, and their power was also raised to the extreme, splitting the heaven and earth apart. Finally, the head hall master roared angrily, waving the hollow scepter in his right hand, and pointed it at the Li City's defensive formation. Swoosh! Swoosh! The 6 giant swords that were resplendent with golden light carried the power to destroy everything, and slashed at the Li City's defensive formation. Chapter 4561. When the 6 dazzling golden blades slashed down, the space within 100,000 miles froze. More than 3,000 elite godly kings from the Kongming Temple looked up at the sky, staring at the 6 huge blades of light. Everyone was praying that the Lord Hallmaster would personally attack and destroy the third defensive array in one move. If that was the case, this war that had been going on for a long time could finally come to an end, and the soldiers would no longer have to sacrifice their lives. However, the soldiers also understood that this was just wishful thinking and it was too difficult to realize. After all, the Lord Hallmaster had spent a lot of effort to destroy the second defensive array. Li Du's third defensive grand formation would only be stronger than the second. At the same time, inside Li Du, Lai Tian and Yen Li, who were in charge of the third defensive array, also realized that something was wrong. Their divine senses passed through the defensive array and saw the situation outside, and they also saw the Lord Hallmaster unleashing his full power. When the 6 golden blades slashed down, the two of them also became nervous. Without any hesitation, the two of them instinctively ordered the 20,000 participating Beast Tribe citizens to unleash their full power, pushing the defensive power of the array to the maximum. The 20,000 citizens had been using their powers to maintain the operation of the defensive array and maintain its stability. Hearing Lai Tian and Yen Li's orders, the 20,000 Beast Tribe citizens released all their divine power without hesitation, desperately activating the power of the defensive array. Swoosh! Suddenly, the defensive array within a radius of 10,000 miles lit up with an even more dazzling light, and the golden barrier became even more solid. At the same time, 6 dazzling golden blades slammed into the defensive formation, causing an earth-shattering boom to erupt. Boom, 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 boom. Amidst the deafening noise, the 6 golden blades suddenly collapsed, exploding into millions of golden fragments that splashed in all directions. The enormous defensive array was also shaken violently by the attacks. Cracking noises were heard and a few wide cracks appeared on it. Without a doubt, the Lord Hallmaster's full power attack had caused serious damage to the defensive array. After all, he had the strength of an upper-level God Emperor. His control of the divine power of heaven and earth and his understanding of the power of heaven and earth far surpassed Ji Tianxing, Lai Tian, and Yen Li. Fortunately, the defensive formation that Ji Tianxing had set up was made up of hundreds of divine formations. It was very mysterious and its power was unfathomable. If it had been an ordinary emperor-level divine array, a huge hole would have been blasted open on the spot. Even so, the first palace master's all-out attack still caused extremely serious consequences. When a few cracks appeared in the defensive formation, the 20,000 beasts controlling the formation were all shaken to varying degrees. Blood gushed out of the orifices of the 600 beasts closest to him as they let loose anguished cries. The lucky ones were severely injured, their strength dropping drastically, and they lost the ability to fight on the spot. As for the unlucky ones, their divine bodies crumbled, and they exploded into a bloody mist that filled the sky. Only their godheads were left and they fled in panic. Naturally, the beastmen who had their divine bodies destroyed and only had their godheads left were unable to escape from the defensive formation. They could only leave the battle formation and retreat to the central region of Li City to try and heal their injuries. In addition, the cracks in the defensive formation also alarmed Ji Tianxing, who was cultivating in the distorted spacetime. He had personally set up the formation, so he naturally had a connection with it. However, when he was setting up the formation, he had also considered that if the formation was broken, it would affect him. Therefore, he had spent a lot of effort to set up the formation so that he would have a connection with the formation, but he would not suffer a backlash when the formation was broken. The Kongming Temple has only been attacking the formation for 6 days, and they've already broken through the defensive formation? No, it must be the first palace master himself. Only he would have such powerful strength and methods. Ji Tianxing and the first palace master had always been in a state of remote combat, where the two kings could not see each other. The first palace master was the trump card of the Kongming Temple, but Ji Tianxing was also the trump card of Li City. Since the first palace master had personally made a move, Ji Tianxing no longer cultivated and hurriedly left the distorted spacetime. Swoosh! After a short breath, he appeared in the sky above Li City, frowning as he stared at the defensive formation in front of him. He saw that many beasts were filled with fear, and under the command of Lai Skylai and Yen Li, they were busy repairing the cracks in the formation. Most of the beasts were still cultivating, trying to increase the power of the defensive formation to resist the attack of the Kongming Temple army. Rumble! Bam bam bam! Along with the light of various divine arts and the shadows of swords and sabers that blotted out the sky, the defensive formation began to shake and golden light burst out. The first palace master had just used a supreme skill, but it was only the initial effect, and he was deeply regretful that he could not make the final decision. Therefore, he frowned as he looked at the defensive formation, secretly using the God's Eye secret technique to carefully observe the structure and network of the formation. A moment later, he saw through the clues and revealed a look of sudden realization. No wonder I was so confident that my supreme skill, which I was confident in, could not break the defensive formation of Li City. So that's why. That god emperor of the primordial tribe is really smart. He realized that I had spied on the structure of the formation, so he modified the entire formation, and even the base and network of the formation were adjusted. It seems that he does not have the confidence to fight with us for the time being, so he can only use this method to stall for time. The first palace master muttered to himself, thinking that he had seen through Ji Tianqing's tricks, and the corner of his mouth curled up in a cold smile. However, he did not know that Ji Tianqing's thoughts and tricks were not limited to this. Although the beasts had more than 600 casualties, compared to the 20,000 beasts who participated in the battle, this number of casualties was acceptable. Yanli quickly arranged for more than 600 beast race people to take the place of the injured and dead, ensuring that the defensive formation operated normally. Moreover, in order to prevent the first palace master from attacking again, Lai Tian and Yanli were fully focused on casting spells, and the power of the defensive formation was pushed to the maximum. Just as all the beasts were worried and thought that the formation would be broken soon, Ji Tianqing appeared. He did not say anything unnecessary and directly flew to the sky above Li City, personally casting spells to control the entire defensive formation. Thousands of beasts worked together to cast spells, but the speed of repairing the defensive formation was still too slow. Ji Tianqing personally cast spells to repair the formation at the fastest speed possible. The few cracks on the golden barrier quickly disappeared and healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. After the formation was repaired, Ji Tianqing released his divine sense, passed through the defensive formation, and investigated the movements of the 4 armies of the Kongming Temple. After grasping the movements of the 4 armies, he asked Lai Tian via voice transmission how many beasts had arrived in Li City. Chapter 4562. It had been half a month since the 4 armies of the Kongming Temple had surrounded them. In other words, Ji Tianqing had already bought half a month of breathing space for the people of the Beast Clan. Next, the Beast Clan's reinforcements would be a force that could not be ignored, and would also be the key to the final battle. Hearing Ji Tianqing's question, Heaven-Splitting Sword did not hesitate and straightforwardly replied, "A total of 500,000 reinforcements are coming from 47 different directions. Now 22 reinforcements have arrived. According to your previous suggestion, I had those 22 reinforcements lurk 400,000 miles away and did not let them act rashly." This result was similar to what Ji Tianqing had expected. With more than 200,000 reinforcements lying in ambush around Li City, he had nothing to worry about. In his original plan, when the 3rd defensive formation was broken, it should also be the final battle. As for the 4th defensive formation he had set up earlier, it was Li City's last life-saving trump card, and it absolutely could not be broken. Of course, the Beast Clan had to win this battle, but they had to win completely. They could not let the entire Li City die with them. Urge the other reinforcements. If they can arrive as soon as possible, that would be for the best. Ji Tianqing sent a sound transmission to Heaven-Splitting Sword and instructed him to do so. Heaven-Splitting Sword quickly responded, indicating that it was already urging him. Long Tian, during this period of time, I have been urging the various reinforcements, but the remaining 25 reinforcements are too far away. Are you so anxious because our 3rd defensive formation won't be able to hold on for much longer? Heaven-Splitting Sword's tone was filled with deep worry. Ji Tianqing calmly replied, "This emperor will personally preside over this defensive formation. Even if the Kongming Temple goes all out and the Lord Hallmaster personally takes action, I will still be able to deal with him for a few more days. You don't have to worry, this battle will end very soon." Heaven-Splitting Sword was willing to believe Ji Tianqing's words, but it really couldn't find a reason, nor did it have enough courage to believe the truth of these words. In its opinion, even if the 22 reinforcements lying in ambush around Li City were to rush out and besiege the Kongming Temple's army now, they might not be able to achieve much. Long Tian, it's not just the people. Even I don't feel confident. Can you tell me the truth? How much longer can we hold on? Will we have to rely on the protection of the 4th formation after the 3rd formation is broken? Using this time, you can also set up the 5th and 6th divine formations? It wasn't strange for Lai Tian to have such thoughts. The 50,000 beast race citizens of Li City had all witnessed Ji Tianqing's powerful attainments in the array Dao. In their opinion, as long as Ji Tianqing was willing, he could set up layer after layer of formations to continue stalling for time. Seeing Lai Tian so anxious, the beastmen in Li City also began to feel uneasy and fearful. Ji Tianqing could only comfort Lai Tian. Things aren't as you think. We don't need the fourth defensive formation. When the third formation is breached, we can counterattack. Heaven Splitter pondered over his words and roughly understood what he meant. The previous battle had lasted for so long in order to deplete the strength of the Kongming Temple's army. By the time the four armies of the Kongming Temple broke through the defensive formation, they would be exhausted, their strength would plummet, and their spirits would be low. The first Hallmaster was indeed experienced and knowledgeable, and his strength was profound. Even if he had never seen Ji Tianqing's method of setting up formations before, he roughly understood it after observing and studying it carefully for 4 hours. After understanding the structure of the formation, the first Hallmaster realized a problem. 100 king-level divine formations were put together to form this defensive formation. Not only did it have extraordinary power, but it was also unpredictable and could change positions with each other. To be honest, the first Hallmaster was very tempted. He wanted to snatch the method of setting up the formation and increase the strength of the Kongming Temple. For the next day, the four armies of the Kongming Temple continued to attack. They fought until the sky and earth were turned upside down, and the sun and moon lost their light. The first Hallmaster no longer attacked. He had been studying the structure of the defensive formation, looking for the weak points and the key to breaking the formation. Little did he know that while the first Hallmaster was thinking about how to break the formation, Ji Tianqing had already controlled the divine formation and killed over 100 elite king-level divine formations. The four Hallmasters were very angry. They cursed Ji Tianqing for being despicable. A day later, the first Hallmaster finally deduced the foundation and meridians of the defensive formation. He took out the divine artifact scepter again and flew into the sky above Li City. The previous scene replayed itself. The first Hallmaster used all his divine power. His robe flapped violently and his long hair danced without wind. The divine power of heaven and earth within a radius of 1,000,000 miles was once again drawn by him and gathered in the sky around him. 10 breaths later, the first Hallmaster used the power of the way of the heavens again. He gathered endless power and condensed it into a divine spear that was 10,000 feet long. Spear of Massacre! The first Hallmaster shouted. He formed a divine seal with his right hand and pointed at the defensive formation of Li City. Whoosh! The divine spear, which contained endless killing intent and divine majesty, was aimed at a certain place in the defensive formation and rushed forward. The surrounding space was compressed again and solidified like ice. Everyone's eyes were only left with the rainbow-like divine spear. It was like the wrath of the heavens as it struck the defensive formation. Without a doubt, the location of the divine spear's attack was found by the first Hallmaster. It was the weakness of the formation. Boom! Crack! A deafening explosion sounded. The colorful divine spear suddenly collapsed, and millions of divine light shards flew out. The defensive formation also shook violently. A shallow pit appeared on its surface and was filled with cracks. At this moment, all of the beasts were cheering with excitement as if a massive weight had been lifted off their shoulders. Ji Tianqing silently cast a spell and quickly repaired the pit on the surface of the formation. On the side of the Kongming Temple, the first Hallmaster was stunned and in disbelief. Damn it! That guy had only set up a relatively simple emperor-level divine formation. But why was it that when 100 divine formations were put together, they could produce such terrifying power? Could it be that my calculation was wrong and there was a mistake? After thinking about it, this was probably the only explanation that would work. Thus, the first Hallmaster stopped attacking and continued to observe the defensive formation to find a way to crack it. Another day passed. This time, the first Hallmaster was not as excited as before. He did not research a way to crack the formation and quickly put it into practice. He thought of more than 10 possibilities and summarized them into 6 ways to crack the formation. Then he began to test them one by one. Boom! Crack! Boom! Boom! Once again an earth-shattering sound rang out from the battlefield. It was so imposing. The defensive formation of Li City began to tremble and flash with golden light. The pressure was great. However, with Ji Tianqing personally presiding over the formation, there was no need to worry about safety. Chapter 4563. This battle was no longer a battle between the 4 armies of the Kongming Temple and the 20,000 beasts. It had also become a duel between the first Hallmaster and Ji Tianxing. Separated by the defensive formation, the two powerhouses each performed their own unique skills and secret techniques, displaying techniques and powers that shocked everyone. For 3 whole days the two sides fought back and forth fiercely. No one stopped to rest. Earth-shattering noises were incessant. The destructive shockwaves continued to spread out in all directions, shaking the sky and the earth. Everything within 200,000 miles of Li City was turned into ruins. In 3 days the first Hallmaster tried 6 different ways to break the formation, but all of them failed without exception. It was not that he was not strong enough, nor was it that his formation skills were not good enough. It was that the formation set up by Ji Tianxing was flawless and interconnected. It was a formation setup method that the first Hallmaster had never seen before. Most importantly, there was too little time left for him to think and verify. If he was given a month, he would definitely be able to find a way to break the formation. There was another crucial point. While the first Hallmaster was trying various ways to break the formation, Ji Tianxing understood his intentions and was always able to stop him at the crucial moment. After 6 attempts ended in failure, the first Hallmaster finally gave up and no longer hoped to break the formation. The only way was to use their strongest power to break the defensive formation. Only then could they enter Li City. However, the 4 armies of the Kongming Temple, more than 3,000 elite god kings, had already used up most of their divine power and were completely exhausted. They had been attacking for 10 days and had used up about 50 to 60% of their divine power. Now their combat strength was greatly reduced and their spirits were also very low. No matter how the 4 Hallmasters tried to boost the morale of the elite god kings, it was to no avail. Under such circumstances, it was almost impossible to count on the soldiers to use their strongest power to help the first Hallmaster break the defensive formation. The first Hallmaster felt helpless, but he could not give up just like that. He could only let the 4 Hallmasters use their full strength at all costs and cooperate with him to launch the final fierce attack. On the other side, Ji Tianxing had fought for 3 days and used up a lot of his divine power. He was dispirited and physically and mentally exhausted. Not only did he have to control the defensive formation, but he also had to command the 20,000 elite beasts and fight the Grand Hallmaster from afar. If it wasn't for his extraordinary talent, the Heaven Mending Pearl, the 5 Elements World and other trump cards that could continuously transfer divine power, he would have consumed more than half of his divine power long ago, and his strength would have dropped greatly. For 3 whole days the army of the Kongming Temple had broken through the defensive formation countless times, creating cracks and gaps in the golden barrier. However, Ji Tianxing was always able to repair those cracks and gaps in the shortest amount of time, never allowing the Kongming Temple's experts to take advantage of the situation. Similarly, the 20,000 beast race elites had been fighting for nearly 10 days. They were also exhausted and exhausted. No matter what method Skysplitter and Loathing used, they were unable to boost their morale, much less tap into their potential. After all, the 20,000 elite beastmen had used up too much energy and were simply too exhausted. Skysplitter and Loathing were very anxious. Looking at the 20,000 elite beastmen in such a state, they didn't dare to imagine what kind of tragic result it would be when the Kongming Temple broke through the defensive formation. While the 2 of them assisted Ji Tianxing in resisting the attacks of the Kongming Temple, they also asked Ji Tianxing what the next plan was. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, was not in a hurry. The current situation was within his expectations. Facing Skysplitter and Loathing's questions, he said calmly, "We're not the only ones who are exhausted. The army of the Kongming Temple is also exhausted. Why are you panicking? Up until now, how many reinforcements have arrived in Li City?" Skysplitter hurriedly replied, 37 reinforcements have already arrived. They are all following orders and lying in ambush around Li City. No traces of them have been exposed. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and ordered, "Pass down the order. Let the 37 reinforcements get ready and be on standby at any time." Skysplitter's eyes immediately brightened, revealing an expectant look. "Long Tian, our reinforcements have been lying in ambush for so long. Can they finally attack? That's great. I believe that the 400,000 reinforcements can't wait any longer." Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "The defensive formation will be breached within a day at most." Skysplitter's eyes immediately dimmed again. He sighed with a heart full of worry. Even such a powerful and perfect formation can only hold on for so long? The truth was just as Xianxia had expected. The battle between the two sides continued for another 20 hours. When night fell, the Hall Masters took the initiative to use their final trump cards. They manipulated 2 Emperor-level divine weapons and used their most powerful killing moves. The 4 Hall Masters did the same. They all used their trump cards and manipulated their Emperor-level divine weapons to release their most powerful divine powers. More than 3,000 elite divine kings, under the orders and calls of the Hall Masters, launched the final fierce attack without regard for anything else. Everyone in the Kongming Temple exploded with their strongest power at this moment and used their final trump cards. At this moment, thousands of divine skill light shadows, carrying with them the power to destroy everything, blasted towards the defensive formation. The Emperor-level divine weapons of the 5 Hall Masters were like the bright moon hanging in the sky or the scorching sun falling from the sky, illuminating a radius of 100,000 miles. The most terrifying divine power of heaven and earth, the most magnificent and vast power of the way of the heavens, with the power to destroy everything, blasted violently against the golden light barrier within a radius of 10,000 miles. Kaboom! Boom boom boom. At this moment, a loud noise shook the heavens and the vast earth. The extremely sturdy golden light barrier could not withstand such a ferocious attack. Dozens of wide cracks instantly appeared on it. Immediately after, endless divine skill light shadows blasted around those cracks, tearing them apart and expanding them into gaps. Along with the sound of cracking and shattering, the entire golden barrier of light shattered into pieces, and millions upon millions of fragments of divine light burst out. Seeing that everyone's combined attack had finally breached the defensive formation of Li City, the 3,000 elite divine kings cheered excitedly. The few palace masters also showed a relieved expression, and a smile appeared on their faces. After so many days of continuous attacks, they had finally exhausted the strength of the beast tribe, causing the defensive formation's power to drop significantly. If not for the preparation they had made over the past few days, their combined attack would not have been able to breach the defensive formation. No matter what, Li City's third defensive formation had been breached. At this moment, Li City was already a defenseless city. Despicable lowly beast tribe, come and suffer the wrath and slaughter of the Kongming Temple. It was not just the Hall Masters. The 3,000 elite divine kings also had such thoughts in their minds. Many divine kings even brandished their sabers and Kenshin soldiers, roaring with murderous intent. At this moment, there was no need for the Hall Masters to motivate them. The morale of the 3,000 elite divine kings had reached a peak. Chapter 45-64. In the instant that the defensive formation was breached, the 20,000 beasts were all given a fright. At the same time, there were also thousands of beasts that were injured or had their divine bodies explode on the spot. Amidst the earth-shattering explosions, the cries of shock and anguish of many beasts could be heard. Fortunately, Lai Tian and Yen Li were already mentally prepared. The two of them released vast amounts of divine power and unleashed mystic techniques to protect the many beasts to prevent the number of casualties from increasing. At the same time, the two of them also used mystic techniques to issue orders for the 37 reinforcements to immediately attack. Xianxia had previously instructed that when the third defensive formation was breached, it would be the time for all reinforcements to attack. The two of them had been waiting for this moment for a long time. On the other side, the leaders of the 37 reinforcements were also wild with joy after receiving the order and couldn't help but let out long howls. Although they arrived at Li City at different times, they all suppressed their killing intent and waited in ambush around Li City after they arrived. Their hearts were already filled with killing intent and they couldn't wait to attack. For this moment, for this order, they had endured and waited for a long time. Charge! It's finally our turn to fight. Charge! Kill all those bastards from the Kongming Temple. At the same time, countless shouts rang out from all directions of Li City. The leaders of the 37 reinforcements all roared angrily and shouted loudly. They led their subordinates of the beast race to charge towards the Li capital without caring about anything else. 400,000 beasts charged at the same time, immediately causing the earth to tremble violently as countless cracks opened up and dust flew into the air. The sky also darkened as dark clouds filled the sky, filling the air with an extremely austere atmosphere. At the same time, the divine light fragments that blotted out the sky around Li City finally dissipated. The earth-shattering explosions gradually disappeared as the four armies of the Kongming Temple finally saw the scene in Li City. Everyone thought that the three barriers of Li City had been breached and that it was completely defenseless. Next, they only needed to advance, besiege, and slaughter the beasts to quickly destroy Li City. However, the scene before their eyes left all of the soldiers dumbfounded. They saw that the Li City with a radius of 10,000 kilometers was still enveloped by a five-colored barrier. The five-colored light barrier was still in operation, releasing divine power fluctuations that were no weaker than the third defensive formation. Without a doubt, that was the fourth defensive formation of Li City. The 3,000 or so elite divine monarchs were all stunned as their expressions became extremely interesting. This is too disgusting. Despicable beasts are simply too despicable. How could this be? Didn't we say that there were only 3 defensive formations? In order to break through the third defensive formation, we've expended so much divine power. Now a fourth formation has appeared. How are we going to survive? In any case, we don't have the energy to attack the fourth defensive formation. How are we going to break through this formation? Let's recuperate for 10 days. Countless elite god kings were grumbling, discussing, and cursing. The morale that had just been raised instantly vanished like smoke into thin air. Everyone had become dispirited, and they were even the idea of retreat. Such an outcome was also beyond the expectations of the several hall masters. The 4 hall masters were filled with vexation, and their hatred for the beasts and Ji Tianqing also reached the extreme. In their view, this must be Ji Tianqing's masterpiece. It was simply too despicable. They all secretly swore that if they were allowed to breach Li City, they would definitely capture Ji Tianqing and cruelly torture him for several hundred years before they could vent their hatred. It was just a pity that there was the fourth defensive formation blocking them. They could only think about this idea. Helpless, the 4 hall masters could only send a message to the head hall master and ask him what they should do. The head hall master was also filled with rage, both helpless and vexed. This outcome was also something that he did not expect. Previously, he always thought that there were only 3 defensive formations in Li City. When he was desperately attacking the third defensive formation, he did not think too much and did not have time to execute divine abilities and mystic arts to observe whether there were more defensive formations inside through that formation. And now he and the 3,000 or so elite divine monarchs were caught in an awkward dilemma. Continuing to attack was clearly impossible. The 3,000 or so elite divine monarchs under his command had already expended all their divine power and were completely exhausted. Ordering them to continue attacking at this time, everyone would have complaints and conflicting emotions in their hearts. It was absolutely impossible for them to risk their lives and attack. Even if those elite divine monarchs continued to attack due to the majesty of the several hall masters, they would not be able to unleash much combat power. Wanting to breach the fourth defensive formation was also an impossible task. Hence, the head hall master could only issue the order to have all the soldiers retreat to a safe area to recuperate and adjust their breathing. No matter what, they had to let the soldiers rest for a few days and recover their strength before they could continue the battle. The head hall master was not worried that the beasts would take advantage of the situation to counterattack. Since the soldiers under his command were all depleted of strength, then the beast situation would not be much better either. Pass down the order, immediately retreat 200,000 miles and find a place to recuperate and adjust. The head hall master finally made a decision and issued the order to the 4 hall masters. After the 4 hall masters received the order, although they were unwilling, they could only convey the order truthfully. Rather, after the 4 armies heard this order, they all revealed expressions of relief and lined up to retreat. However, just as the 4 armies were retreating dejectedly, earth-shattering battle cries and extremely powerful divine power vibrations came from the sky behind them. Kill. Charge. Don't let those bastards escape. Don't let a single one of them go. Leave no one alive. Those were the roars and shouts of countless beasts. Sensing that something was amiss, the 4 armies all stopped and turned around to look behind them. They also released their divine senses to check the situation. Then the elite divine monarchs saw a scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. They saw that the sky was covered by dazzling 5-colored divine light. There were at least tens of thousands of huge figures enveloped in dazzling divine light that charged over at lightning speed. Every ray of light was wrapped around the figure of a beast tribe member. An endless number of beasts surged forth like a tidal wave. It was a huge encirclement that covered tens of thousands of miles and was rapidly shrinking. This scene gave the 3,000 elite divine monarchs a shock. Everyone was caught off guard, and their expressions changed drastically as they revealed looks of fear. Where did so many beasts come from? Oh no. Those are the beasts' reinforcements. How can there be so many? A rough estimate would say that there are more than 100,000 of them. It's over. We must have surrounded Li City for too long and failed to take it down, giving them a chance to call for reinforcements. Chapter 45-65. There were simply too many beast reinforcements. Their figures filled every corner of Li City, blotting out the sky and covering the earth like a tidal wave. The Kongming Temple's 4 armies were not mentally prepared, so the sudden attack of hundreds of thousands of beasts naturally gave them quite a fright. Even the 4 temple masters were momentarily stunned. They could not think of a good countermeasure and hurriedly reported the situation to the first temple master. In fact, the first temple master had discovered the beast reinforcements earlier than them and had also observed their numbers. There were as many as 400,000 beasts. From that moment on, the first temple master's expression became somewhat unsightly, and his eyes were extremely grave. When the 4 temple masters sent him a message asking for a countermeasure, only 2 breaths had passed. In these 2 breaths, the first temple master had already thought through the cause and effect and made a decisive decision. The hundreds of thousands of beast reinforcements seemed frightening, but in reality, their average strength was not very strong. Even if the Kongming Temple's 4 armies were surrounded and there was no way they could defeat the hundreds of thousands of beast reinforcements, it was not as if they had no chance of escaping. Thus, the first temple master decisively ordered the 4 armies to immediately gather their forces and break out of the encirclement. No matter what, no matter the price, the 4 armies had to break out of the encirclement. Right now, the Kongming Temple's goal was not to break into Li City, nor was it to capture the young flood god emperor, nor was it to slaughter the beasts of Li City. Instead, it was to preserve as much of their strength as possible. After the 4 temple masters received the order, they did not hesitate and immediately led their soldiers to break out of the encirclement with all their might. This was something that had to be done. The 4 armies did not have any thoughts of resistance. They all followed the 4 temple masters' orders and arranged themselves into a sharp knife formation to break out of the encirclement as quickly as possible. Everyone was well aware that the hundreds of thousands of beast reinforcements were enough to overwhelm them and annihilate them. And they had no way out. Behind them was Li City's defensive formation. Once the battle began, the beast army within Li City would definitely charge out to join the battle and attack them from both inside and outside. At that time, the 3,000 elite god kings would really be powerless to reverse the situation. They would be dead for sure. The 4 temple masters did not need to boost morale. The elite god kings had to do their best to save their lives. Shwa. As the dazzling divine light flashed, the 2 sides rapidly approached each other in the sky, and then fiercely collided. Boom. Ping ping ping. As soon as they met, both sides released their most powerful divine abilities and lost skills, launching a fierce collision. Every palace master led an army of between 800 to 900 people. As for the reinforcements that surrounded them, there were as many as 70 to 80,000 beasts. This was despite the fact that the difference in numbers between the 2 sides was around 90 times. However, in the first round of battle, the 4 armies of the Kongming Temple did not fall into a disadvantageous position. Instead, they gained the upper hand. Led by the 4 hall masters, they were at the very top of the sword formation and were also the first to cut into the beast race's reinforcements. With their god emperor stage powers, they unleashed peerlessly powerful divine abilities and killed several dozen beasts in a single exchange. At the same time, they blocked most of the attacks from the beastmen's reinforcements for their soldiers. Many elite divine kings followed closely behind. They followed the 4 hall masters and charged forward. The effect was very obvious. After 2 breaths of time, the first round of battle ended. At this moment, the 4 armies of the Kongming Temple had advanced by several dozen kilometers. The total number of casualties was only slightly more than 20 people. On the other hand, the beast race reinforcements formation had been torn apart. The number of casualties was also close to 2,000. The difference in numbers between the two sides was close to 100 times, but the number of casualties was also close to 100 times. This was simply too shocking. At the same time, this also directly proved how powerful the Kongming Temple was. However, the advantage that the Kongming Temple had was quickly exhausted. When the four armies cut into the beast race reinforcements formation, they were completely surrounded by the beast race reinforcements. It was as if they had sunk into a swamp. Even though the four hall masters were powerful and could kill many beasts, almost no one could get close to them. However, the elite divine kings under their command were weak and their fighting strength had greatly decreased. They were like arrows at the end of their flight. On average, each divine king of the Kongming Temple was surrounded by dozens to hundreds of beasts. No matter how powerful they were, under the siege of countless beast race reinforcements, they were unable to display their abilities, let alone have much effect. Therefore, in the sky around Li City, the situation on the battlefield immediately changed. Everyone could clearly see that the four armies had plunged headfirst into the sea of beasts. At first, they had charged very quickly and violently for more than 100 kilometers. However, soon after, the four armies were surrounded by hundreds of thousands of beast race reinforcements. They were like ships submerged by raging waves, bobbing up and down in the huge waves. The speed of the four armies' advance slowed down again and again until they had sunk into a swamp. They began to struggle and wriggle slowly. Even though the beast race reinforcements' casualties were still increasing, the resistance of the four armies was getting weaker and weaker. Casualties also began to appear and gradually increased. This was the result that everyone had expected. When two armies fought, it was as the saying went. The first drum of energy, the second would weaken and the third would be exhausted. When the momentum of the four armies was exhausted and the four hall masters were surrounded and unable to escape, the four armies would begin to lose. The hall masters were also mentally prepared. They did not hope to be able to lead their soldiers to retreat unscathed. They only hoped to preserve as much of their strength as possible. Simply put, they wanted to preserve as much of their lives as possible. Just as the two sides were engaged in a chaotic battle, a huge door suddenly opened in the defensive formation that enveloped Li City. From the dazzling door of light, a handsome black-haired youth in white robes flew out first. He stepped across the sky with a cold expression. He held a divine sword that was as black as ink in his right hand and headed straight for the battlefield in the north. Their 120,000 beast race reinforcements were besieging the first hall master, second hall master, and more than 800 elite god kings. Both sides were engaged in an earth-shattering battle as divine light flashed. Immediately after, two tall figures flew out from the five-colored door of light of the defensive formation. They were Lai Tian and Yen Li. Both of them had cold expressions and their bodies were filled with killing intent that soared into the sky. In order to wait for this day, they had suffered and endured for far too long. At this moment, the anger, hatred, and killing intent that had been accumulating in their hearts for a long time could finally be released. When Lai Tian and Yen Li flew across the sky, more than 5,000 beast race god kings flew out from the five-colored door of light. These 5,000 beast race god kings were selected by Lai Tian and Yen Li from the tens of thousands of beast race troops. Although they had participated in the battle to protect Li City and expended a large amount of divine power, they were still in good condition. However, they were in relatively good condition and their strength was preserved better. They still had the strength to fight. These 5,000 beast race god kings followed Lai Tian and Yen Li closely and headed straight for the battlefield in the north. Chapter 4566. They saw Ji Tianxing leading Lai Tian, Yen Li and more than 5,000 beast tribe godly kings toward the battlefield with murderous intent. Tens of thousands of miles away, the first hall master and second hall master's expressions changed as they frowned. What I was most worried about has finally happened. The first hall master turned to look at Ji Tianxing and more than 5,000 beast tribe godly kings and sighed with a gloomy expression. A trace of helplessness flashed across the second hall master's eyes as he smiled bitterly. We can only blame ourselves for dragging it out for too long, resulting in such a situation. This was their plan from the start. They were waiting for this moment. How could they not attack? The first hall master naturally understood this as well. He nodded and said, "Forget it. The only thing we can do now is to fight with all our might. How many people we can bring back alive will be up to the heavens." Even in such a dangerous situation, the first Hall Master was not worried about his own safety. As long as he did not want to die, Xianxia and the Beast Tribe experts would not be able to kill him. Similarly, the other 4 Hall Masters were the same. They are obviously coming for the 2 of us. The second Hall Master gripped the divine weapon in his hand tightly as he shouted with a fierce expression, "We must stop them. We must not let them slaughter our elites." Then the second Hall Master waved his divine weapon and released an Emperor-level divine ability killer move as he took the initiative to attack Xianxia. The first Hall Master did not care about the surrounding Beast Tribe reinforcements. His figure flashed and teleported 30,000 miles away, blocking Lai Tian and Yen Li as he brazenly attacked. Bam! Boom! In the next moment, the divine abilities released by the second Hall Master and Xianxia collided violently. Lai Tian and Yen Li joined forces and used the Beast Tribe's divine ability to fight the first Hall Master. In the deafening explosion, the divine abilities of the 2 sides collided and exploded into fragments of divine light that filled the sky, creating a terrifying hurricane. The destructive shock wave spread out in all directions. Not only did it sweep through the ruins, but it also injured many Beast Tribe reinforcements, especially those Divine Lord Realm beasts. After being swept up by the shockwaves, they either died or were injured. The scene was extremely tragic. On the other hand, the elite godly kings of the Kongming Temple were, firstly, few in number and secondly, stronger in strength. They were not affected too much. For the Kongming Temple, this was of course an advantage. The first Palace Master and second Palace Master also let go of their restraints. They no longer held back and attacked with all their might. However, Xianxia was not afraid of the second Palace Master at all when he used his full strength. He was already able to fight the second Palace Master to a draw. The first Palace Master's strength was higher than Lai Tian and Yen Li's, but he was fighting 1 against 2. Moreover, Lai Tian and Yen Li cooperated very well, so the first Palace Master couldn't gain the upper hand. Just like that, the first Hall Master and second Hall Master were held back. They were unable to take care of and protect the 800 elite God Kings. Taking advantage of this opportunity, more than 5,000 elite God Kings of the beast race charged forward silently, surrounding and annihilating the 800 or so Kongming Temple God Kings. Kill. Charge out. The battlefield quickly expanded to a radius of 70 to 80,000 miles. This area was completely filled with the light of divine arts. It was chaos. All kinds of divine arts collided and exploded. Deafening battle cries and painful screams rang out one after another. What a lively and tragic battle. Throughout the history of the planet of origin, ever since the Kongming Temple was built, this was definitely the largest battle in history with the largest number of participants. Regardless of the outcome of this battle, it would definitely be recorded in the annals of history and remembered by future generations. Time passed quietly. Even though the 400,000 beast race troops and the 3,000 god kings of the Kongming Temple had no time to calculate the time, 6 hours passed. The first Palace Master and second Palace Master were still held back by Xianxia, Lai Tian and Yen Li. They were unable to extricate themselves. Of course, the 5-god Emperor had also moved the battlefield to 200,000 miles away in the sky. 80% of the 800 elite god kings under the first Palace Master and second Palace Master had been slaughtered. The remaining 100 or so god kings were also covered in blood and wounds. They were still holding on bitterly. They were surrounded by tens of thousands of beast race experts and could not hold on for long. In at most 2 hours they would all be slaughtered. It was worth mentioning that the 400,000 beast race troops were only left with 300,000 or so. In the past 6 hours, at least 100,000 beast race experts had died tragically in this battle. 1/3 of the beast race experts were killed by the 5 palace masters of the Kongming Temple. After all, they were the supreme god emperor. They had absolute dominance and power on the battlefield. Broken limbs were everywhere in the ruins. The desolate soil and gravel had long been dyed red by the beast race's blood. Even the air was filled with a scarlet blood mist. As for the encirclement formed by the beast race reinforcements, it had expanded from 30,000 miles to 100,000 miles at the start of the battle. It could not be helped. It was not that the beast race army wanted to expand the encirclement. Instead, it was because the 4 armies of the Kongming Temple were attacking them from all directions. The 3rd Palace Master was not injured. However, he had used up too much of his divine power. His abilities were declining. Of the 900 elite god kings under his command, 400 had died in battle. 200 were severely injured. However, there were 100 lucky ones who seized the opportunity to escape from the beast race's encirclement. They disappeared into the horizon and escaped into the forest. The third palace master was still holding on bitterly to protect the god kings under his command. He was confident that he could lead 200 elite god kings out of the beast race's encirclement. On the other side, the fourth palace master was also safe and sound. However, he had used up a lot of his divine power. He was mentally exhausted and his face was pale. Out of the 800 elite god kings under his command, 500 had died in battle. They had turned into dust and dregs and were scattered in the ruins. Out of the 300 elite god kings who survived, only 50 of them had found the opportunity to escape from the beast race's encirclement. The remaining 200 or so people crowded closely around the fourth palace master. Even though they were severely injured and extremely weak, they could still hold on for a while with the fourth palace master's protection. As for whether the fourth palace master could lead them out of Li City alive, no one knew. On the other side of the battlefield, the fifth palace master's robe was stained with blood. He was in a sorry state. Out of the few palace masters, he was the weakest. In the previous 6 hours of battle, not only had he used up too much of his divine power, he had also suffered some light injuries. As for the 800 elite god kings under his command, 500 of them had been killed. Only 200 of them were left alive. However, they were like arrows at the end of their flight and were on the verge of death. Only 20 of them were lucky enough to find an opportunity to escape. The remaining 200 people were in a terrible state. The fifth palace master no longer had the confidence to lead them out of the beast race's encirclement. Chapter 4567. Life and death, success and failure, often changed in an instant. Not long ago, the Kongming Temple had the upper hand and attacked the defensive formation of Li City. They swore to destroy Li City and kill all the people of the Beast Clan. However, at this moment, over 3,000 elite god kings from the Divine Hall of Space had been slaughtered. There were countless casualties. Such a huge change was not expected by anyone from the Kongming Temple. However, everything that seemed to happen by chance was actually inevitable. Therefore, it was reasonable for the 4 armies of the Kongming Temple to be surrounded and attacked by 400,000 Beast Clan soldiers. This great battle finally came to an end after 10 hours. Out of the 400,000 Beast Clan soldiers, only 250,000 survived. The other 150,000 died in the battle. Even the 5,000 elite divine kings that Lai Tian and Yan Li brought along lost over 1,000 of them. Only 3,600 survived. Regardless of the outcome of the battle, the Beast Clan's sacrifice was huge and shocking. After this battle, the Beast Clan would need to recuperate for at least a few hundred years to recover. If the Kongming Temple's loss was not huge enough, the Kongming Temple would not have given the Beast Clan a few hundred years to recover. Fortunately, the Kongming Temple's loss was huge. Out of the 3,000 elite divine kings, only 500 of them survived. Under the lead of the 4 temple masters, they escaped and left Li City. The remaining 3,200 elite divine kings died tragically in this battle. They were turned into powder and ashes. The 4 temple masters who escaped successfully were of course led by the Grand Temple Master. He had the power of the upper level of the God Emperor. He had all kinds of remarkable powers and techniques. Even if Ji Tianqing, Lai Tian and Yan Li attacked together, they could not do anything to him. Apart from that, the Second Temple Master, Third Temple Master and Fourth Temple Master also escaped successfully after paying a certain price. Even though their injuries were serious, it did not affect their ability to continue fighting. The unluckiest one was, of course, the Fifth Temple Master. He was the God Emperor, but he was the weakest among the 5 Palace Masters. In the beginning, he was only able to hold on against the Beastmen reinforcements and the soldiers under his command. However, in the last 2 hours of the battle, Ji Tianqing suddenly changed his strategy. At that time, the Beastmen's reinforcements had suffered heavy casualties, and the Kongming Temple's army had also suffered heavy casualties. Ji Tianqing vowed to weaken the Kongming Temple's strength and find a way to get rid of a temple master. Therefore, he set his sights on the weakest 5th Hall Master. He ordered the 3,000 elite beast race god kings to attack the 5th Hall Master at all costs. Even if the fifth Hall Master was an expert of the God Emperor and possessed many divine abilities and methods, he was still unable to defeat the fifth Hall Master. But in the end he was still lacking in strength, and it was difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 feet. After an hour of fighting he was finally seriously injured. At that moment, Ji Tianxing suddenly abandoned the eldest temple master and teleported to the battlefield tens of thousands of miles away to launch a sneak attack on the fifth Hall Master. The fifth Hall Master was busy dealing with the beast race god kings, and he did not expect Ji Tianxing, who had been fighting with the eldest temple master, to suddenly appear in front of him. When Ji Tianxing unleashed his divine ability and secret technique, the fifth palace master was stunned for a moment. He found it hard to believe. Even though the fifth Hall Master reacted and dodged at the most critical moment, he was still too slow. But he was still one step too slow. Kaboom! Amidst the deafening explosion, the blinding light of the divine sword struck the fifth Hall Master hard. Instantly the fifth Hall Master was hit until blood spurted out. He let out a painful groan and flew dozens of miles away. Only a god emperor like Ji Tianxing could injure and severely injure the fifth Hall Master. When the fifth Hall Master flew out of the ruins, he was already covered in blood and his hair was disheveled. He was in a sorry state. After succeeding in one move, Ji Tianxing did not give the fifth Hall Master any time to catch his breath. He teleported again and started to pursue him. Sword of Daytime. Sword breaking 9 heavens. Sword of Apocalypse. Ji Tianxing took turns to use all kinds of divine abilities and ultimate skills, blasting them all at once toward the fifth Hall Master. Even though the fifth Hall Master had an emperor-level divine weapon to protect himself, he was still flustered and exhausted from the attacks. He kept retreating in defeat. After 5 moves, the fifth Hall Master was pushed back 30,000 miles. His robe was soaked in blood and his injuries were even more severe. Ji Tianxing used his last secret skill to attack him indiscriminately. The fifth Hall Master's strength was quickly depleted and he became weaker and weaker. In the end he could no longer resist Ji Tianxing's fierce attacks. He could only rely on his instinct to control the emperor-level divine weapon to protect himself. Another 30 breaths had passed. Ji Tianxing attacked a few more times and finally the fifth Hall Master's divine body collapsed, exploding into a bloody mist that filled the sky. In order to prevent the fifth Hall Master from using any secret skill, he could use the divine power of heaven and earth and the power of heaven way to quickly retrieve the bloody mist and reform his divine body. Ji Tianxing manipulated the divine power of heaven and earth and used a Taoist rhyme to burn the bloody mist into nothingness. In this way the fifth Hall Master's divine body was completely destroyed, and there was no possibility of recovery. He only had one godhood left. If he wanted to reform his divine body he would have to spend a lot of time and effort. While Ji Tianxing was using his secret skill to destroy the bloody mist, the fifth Hall Master's godhood fled decisively. He was terrified and panicked. His unparalleled desire to survive caused him to unleash his powerful potential. With the help of the divine power of heaven and earth, the fifth Hall Master's godhood leaped tens of thousands of miles and fled toward the west. Ji Tianxing of course had to give chase and he could catch up in a few breaths' time. However, the fifth Hall Master fled in the same direction as the first Hall Master and second Hall Master. It was obvious that the fifth Palace Master was going after the 2 Palace Masters. He knew that he only had one godhood left, and there was no way he could escape Ji Tianxing's pursuit. He could only escape with the help of the 2 Hall Masters. As expected, when Ji Tianxing was about to catch up with the fifth Hall Master, the fifth Hall Master finally escaped to the vicinity of the first Hall Master and second Hall Master. When the 2 Hall Masters saw that the fifth Hall Master's divine body had been destroyed, and that his remaining godhood was severely injured, they were inexplicably shocked. Even though they were mentally prepared and knew that Ji Tianxing was very powerful, they still could not believe it. They still could not believe that Ji Tianxing could destroy the fifth Hall Master's divine body in such a short time. It was simply too terrifying. The 2 Hall Masters were stunned. Without hesitation they used all their strength to stop Ji Tianxing and protect the fifth Hall Master. Bang! Bang! Boom! 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 Ji Tianxing rushed over with a murderous aura, but he was intercepted by the 2 Hall Masters. Both sides waved their swords and the Kenshin soldiers collided fiercely. A deafening explosion erupted. Energy overflowed and divine light danced wildly. Ji Tianxing was sent flying by the impact. His charging momentum was stopped on the spot. The first Hall Master and second Hall Master also panted a few times. They stopped tangling with Ji Tianxing and covered the retreat of their soldiers and the fifth Hall Master. Chapter 45-68. Even though Ji Tianxing was unwilling to give up and chased after the fifth Hallmaster's divinity for 300,000 miles and swore to kill him, the first Hallmaster and second Hallmaster tried their best to stop him. Ji Tianxing could only give up regretfully. The battle that lasted for half a month ended just like that. Li City was successfully saved. 50,000 beasts were safe and sound. Only 4,000 beasts that participated in the battle died in battle. Furthermore, the beasts that sacrificed the most were the reinforcements. A total of 150,000 beasts died in battle. Another 100,000 beasts were severely injured and would not be able to recover in a short period of time. As for the Kongming Temple, they also suffered heavy casualties and returned in defeat. When they came, 4,000 elite divine kings came. They were aggressive, murderous, and full of ambition. In the end, only the 5 palace masters managed to escape with more than 600 defeated soldiers. They were battered and exhausted. More than 3,300 elite divine kings were forever left in Li City, turned into ashes and dust. Even the 600 elite god kings who managed to escape were extremely heavily injured. At most they would need to enter seclusion for a few hundred years, and at least 100 years to recover their strength. These people were the elite experts of the Kongming Temple. They were the backbone of the various hallmasters and the main force of the temple. Moreover, one of the hallmasters was severely injured and even his body was destroyed. Suffering such heavy injuries was definitely a huge blow to the Kongming Temple. The Kongming Temple's power was also greatly weakened because of this. It would take at least 1,000 years for them to recover. Before this, the Kongming Temple had an absolute advantage. They could completely suppress the beasts and make them cower in fear. They could only secretly develop their power and strive to rule. However, from this battle onwards, history was rewritten. The power structure between the Kongming Temple and the beasts also changed. Although this battle was not enough for the beasts to completely overtake the Kongming Temple and gain the upper hand, it was impossible for them to suddenly surpass the Kongming Temple. However, in the next few hundred years, the Kongming Temple would no longer have the strength to deal with the beasts. Even suppressing the beasts' development would be difficult. This battle allowed the Kongming Temple to see the beast race's determination to resist. It also allowed them to see Lai Tian and Yan Li's ambitions. It also made them realize that the beast race was not as ignorant as they had thought. As the old saying goes, once bitten, twice shy. After this crushing defeat, the Kongming Temple would definitely leave behind painful memories and lessons. In the future, if any temple master wanted to make a move against the beast clan, they would definitely be opposed. They would definitely have to think it through carefully. After Ji Tianxing gave up on killing the fifth Hall Master, he decisively changed his target and went after the scattered Kongming Temple elites. An hour later, he killed more than 30 elite deity kings of the Kongming Temple before returning to Li City to recuperate. As for the 200,000 beast race reinforcements, they also madly chased for 4 hours. They surrounded more than 100 elite deity kings of the Kongming Temple before returning to Li City. At this time, the people of the Kongming Temple had already escaped far away. The 4 temple masters had summoned their divine warships and carried the defeated soldiers away. The beast race reinforcements did not have any warships. With their strength, they could not catch up to the Kongming Temple's divine warships. They could only retreat to Li City. The battle was completely over. Lai Tianlai and Yan Li were also exhausted and weak. However, they could not rest yet. They still had to deal with the aftermath. Under their arrangements, more than 10,000 beast race citizens flew out of Li City to clean up the battlefield. 20,000 beast race citizens were busy saving the dying and healing the injured. The entire Li City was busy, but every beast race citizen's face was brimming with excitement and smiles. Even the warriors who were heavily injured had forgotten their pain. They were still emotional as they excitedly recounted the scene of them bravely killing the enemy. When they talked about how the elite deity kings of the Kongming Temple fled pathetically and how they were scared out of their wits, they would even laugh loudly and dance with excitement. In the end, because they were too excited, their movements were too big and they tore open their wounds. Thus, a strange scene that could only be seen in the beast race appeared. The beast race warriors, who were riddled with wounds and covered in blood, laughed loudly as blood spurted from their bodies. Even though they grimaced in pain and let out waves of blood-curdling screams, they could not contain their excitement. Just like that, an entire night passed. This night, the entire Li city was brightly lit. Nearly 300,000 beast race reinforcements and citizens filled Li city to the brim. Majestic and burly figures could be seen everywhere. Some of them were gathered in groups of 3 to 5. They endured their injuries as they chatted and laughed loudly. Some of them were brutish men with wounds all over their bodies. Even if they were missing an arm or a leg, they would still gather together and drink to their heart's content. In any case, the beast race reinforcements were not in a hurry to heal their wounds. Instead, they were all using their own methods to express the excitement in their hearts. It could not be helped. This victory was truly an unprecedented first in history. It was too much of a shock to the beast race. In the past, the beast race was weak and could only be bullied by the Kongming Temple. They had no power to fight back and were treated as prey. They did not have the ability to fight back against the Kongming Temple. Over time, the Kongming Temple began to think that the beast race was weak and ignorant. Even all the beast race thought the same. This notion had already been deeply ingrained into the hearts of the beast race. However, the success of this battle had overturned everyone's notions. It was not just the elite deity kings and temple masters of the Kongming Temple. Even all the beast race citizens could not believe this fact. The people of the Kongming Temple could not believe or accept that they had actually lost to the ignorant beast race. The beast race citizens could not believe it either. After being bullied for so many years, they were actually able to achieve victory in their first direct confrontation with the Kongming Temple. They had completely defeated the Kongming Temple and had to retreat in defeat. How could they not be excited by such a shocking matter? When the beastmen gathered together, the one they talked about the most was Zhi Tianxing. After everyone's discussion, they unanimously agreed that the main reason why the beast race was able to defeat the beast race was because of Zhi Tianxing. If it was not for Zhi Tianxing's help and guidance, Li City would have been conquered long ago. They would not have been able to hold on until the reinforcements arrived. The 50,000 beast race citizens would have all been killed. As such, Zhi Tianxing's position in the hearts of the beast race citizens rose to an extremely high position. Everyone worshipped and was extremely grateful to him. If Lai Tian and Yan Li did not dissuade them, the 300,000 beast race citizens and the reinforcements would have to party for a few more days before their emotions could calm down. On the third day, Lai Tian and Yan Li realized that the citizens were too excited and were completely unwilling to rest and recuperate. They could only issue orders and force everyone to rest and recuperate. As such, Li City finally quieted down. Many of the injured went into seclusion in an orderly manner to recuperate. Lai Tian and Yan Li arranged many follow-up matters before they heaved a sigh of relief. They hurriedly went to report the results to Zhi Tianxing. Chapter 4569. After the battle ended, Zhi Tianxing returned to Li City and entered his residence to adjust his breathing. He didn't need to worry about the follow-up matters. Lai Tian and Yan Li would arrange it properly. In the previous battle, although he didn't fight many times and didn't last long, but there was no doubt that he definitely put in the most effort and took the greatest credit. The 4 defensive arrays that enveloped Li City were all personally arranged by him. In the final battle, he was also the core that blocked the 1st Palace Master and 2nd Palace Master and seriously injured the 5th Palace Master. In order to win, he paid the most effort and strength. After the battle, he also entered a rather weak state. His strength had declined too much, so he could only recuperate and recover. When Lai Tian and Yan Li saw him, it was in the secret chamber of his residence. Zhi Tianxing didn't ask too much. He just listened to Lai Tian's report and knew the exact number of casualties on both sides, so he didn't ask any more. Lai Tian also asked him if he had any plans or orders for the next battle. He waved his hand and said to Lai Tian, "After this battle, the Kongming Temple's vitality has been greatly damaged, and their strength has been greatly weakened. They will need to recuperate for at least hundreds of years before they dare to think of revenge. And such a long time is enough for the Beast Clan to recuperate, set up a defense line, and monitor the movements of the Kongming Temple. Do you understand what this emperor means?" Lai Tian quickly nodded and asked, "You mean to order the soldiers who participated in the battle to recuperate and recover their strength as soon as possible. In addition, we still can't relax our vigilance. We have to set up a defense line at the border and monitor the movements of the Kongming Temple at all times to prevent their revenge?" "That's right." Zhi Tianxing nodded and continued, In the next 1 or 2 years, this emperor will be in seclusion to recuperate and recover my vitality. The divine abilities and secret techniques that I taught you before are enough for you to comprehend and cultivate for many years. Once you've mastered the art of setting up formations, you can try setting up some formations around Li City. Just treat it as practice. As for Yan Li, after you have learned several refining techniques, you can try to refine divine tools and explore and comprehend on your own. Both Lai Tian and Yan Li could see that Ji Tianqing was very weak. Although he seemed to have only suffered light injuries, his mind was exhausted and his strength was empty. This was not something that could be recovered in a short period of time. Lai Tian and Yan Li understood Ji Tianqing's good intentions. They nodded and said yes, indicating that they would do as he said. Before the final battle, Yan Li was still a little worried. She was afraid that Ji Tianqing's prestige in the beast race was too high and that some uncontrollable situations would arise in the future. However, after the decisive battle earlier, Yan Li completely dispelled those thoughts. Now it was more respectful than wary of Ji Tianqing. Seeing that Ji Tianqing had finished giving out his orders, he had also made arrangements for the beast race's tasks for the next 2 years. Sky Split and Yan Li were just about to bid farewell and leave when Ji Tianqing suddenly raised his hand and called out to them. Did you forget that there's still one more thing that you haven't told me? Lai Tian and Yan Li frowned, looking at each other with doubtful faces. What's the matter? Long Tian, we can't guess it. Why don't you remind us? Ji Tianqing frowned as if he wasn't happy. He only reminded them with a few words. The thing that I want. Lai Tian and Yan Li instantly understood his meaning and hurriedly explained, Long Tian, don't worry. This is our agreement. How could we forget it? Don't worry, the people of my clan as well as the lords of the various territories have been trying their best to gather resources for refining artifacts. This time they were delayed by the war. Now that the war is over, I will continue to urge them to search. Seeing that Ji Tianqing was silent and seemed to think that they were being perfunctory, Lai Tian and Yan Li were a little embarrassed. Lai Tian hesitated for a moment before he finally patted his chest and said, Long Tian, I can guarantee you that when you're done with your secluded cultivation, I'll definitely hand over several emperor-grade refining materials to you. We won't go back on our promises to you. Well, you can go do your work. Getting such a reply, Ji Tianqing nodded and waved his hand to send Lai Tian and Yan Li away. Then Li City quieted down completely. Everyone calmed down and healed their wounds. Skylai and Yan Li followed Ji Tianqing's instructions and issued a series of orders step by step. After dealing with these things, they calmed down and went into seclusion to heal their wounds. Li City resumed its tranquility. The 300,000 people were in seclusion to heal their wounds. The 100,000 reinforcements who hadn't arrived at Li City received the news of the victory and returned to their territories. The news of the victory spread from Li City to the unknown lands and quickly reached the major territories. It was known by millions of beast tribes. Almost all the beast tribes couldn't believe that this news was true. They couldn't believe that the beast tribes had been weak for so many years. They had been bullied and hunted down by the Kongming Temple. Unexpectedly, there was a day when they could turn the tables and win. Such shocking news made all the beast tribes boil with excitement. They cheered and celebrated enthusiastically. They sang praises of Lai Tian and Yan Li and worshipped them. While the beast tribes were discussing the victory of the war, they couldn't avoid mentioning the god emperor of a foreign race. That was Ji Tianqing. After Ji Tianqing entered Li City, he taught the people of the beast race and personally set up the defensive formation. Countless people of the beast race also knew about it. In the midst of the discussion and debate, everyone confirmed a fact. That was, Ji Tianqing had contributed greatly to the victory of this war. His contributions couldn't go unnoticed. So much so that his contributions were even above Lai Tian and Yan Li's. Although such words and arguments were suspected of being disrespectful to Lai Tian and Yan Li. But the beast tribes were an uneducated race. They didn't know much about etiquette and tactful words. They only knew how to speak frankly and express their true thoughts. Just like that, Ji Tianqing's name spread widely among the beast tribes. He was revered and worshipped by millions of beast tribes. As the news spread more and more, after half a month, 80% of the beast tribes had already treated Ji Tianqing as a leader on par with Lai Tian and Yan Li. Of course, this was all in the future. Now let's talk about the 4 hall masters of Kongming Temple and the hundreds of defeated soldiers. After escaping hundreds of thousands of miles away from Li City and shaking off the pursuit of Ji Tianxing and the Beast Tribe's reinforcements, the 4 Hall Masters decisively took out their divine warships. The 4 divine warships carried more than 500 heavily injured elite divine kings. They flew across the sky in a panic and sped at an unknown location at high speed. The 5th Hall Master's injuries were too severe. His godhead had fallen into a coma and he was unconscious. The 1st Hall Master kept his godhead in a secret room in the divine warship. He used a formation to provide power and slowly nurture it. This was only a temporary measure. It could only prevent the 5th Hall Master's injuries from worsening. As for the 5th Hall Master's complete recovery, it wasn't something that could be done in 1 or 200 years.